Chapter 350. While the invigilators were discussing regretfully, Yi Qian remained calm and began the middle school exams. Returning to the examination hall after nearly a year, the speed at which she wrote still surpassed all the other examinees. The invigilator standing beside her was dumbfounded. The speed at which she wrote was something that even the teachers could not catch up with. Politics, history, language, and English were still manageable. After all, they were rote memorization. But mathematics, chemistry, and physics were exams that required thinking. They needed to be calculated. They needed to be calculated on draft paper. But Yi Qian did not need to do that. When the mathematics exam began, the invigilator was shocked. You don't even need to calculate. The stunned invigilator raised his hand to press down on Yi Qian's exam paper. He looked at the legendary girl in surprise. You don't even need to calculate these. Only the last 2 application questions and 1 geometry question were left. When Yi Qian checked the exam paper to see if there were any problems, she had already memorized all the questions and calculated the answers accordingly in her mind. Even if the invigilator stopped her now, it would not delay her answering time. Hearing this, she smiled and said, "Of course I do. I've already calculated it in my mind." She pointed at the draft paper and said, "I can also save paper." The point was not to save paper, the point was. The invigilator took a deep breath and pointed at the exam paper. He forced himself to calm down and said, "Come, you should calculate these questions first. We'll talk after the exam." The last 3 major questions were important and also multiple-point questions. No matter how shocked the invigilator was, he could not delay Yi Qian's exam. He knew that this girl did not score in biology or geography. He originally thought that Yi Qian would need to calculate the last 3 major questions or do some mental calculations. In the end, he saw the girl nod obediently after he removed his hand and she started writing. She really started writing. Just like that, she finished the 3 major questions in one go without a pause. She did not need to use draft paper or do any calculations. She just started writing as if she already had the answers in her mind. After he was done, Yi Qian immediately put the test paper away. He did not want to leave anything that could be used against him. The invigilator did not realize that Yi Qian was wary of him. When he picked out his pen, Yi Qian stood up. "Sir, can I hand in my paper first?" There was no way to confirm if Yi Zhifan had done anything, but it was always better to be safe than sorry. "There's still 80 minutes to go. Do you want to check the papers again? I'll collect it later." Looking at his watch, the teacher swallowed his saliva. "This question is too fast." "No need, I'm done." "And teacher, can I hand in my paper and leave the exam hall now?" Yi Qian was already used to her teacher's shocked expression. This time, she deliberately increased her speed to let some people know that his tricks were nothing. Trying to trap her. It was simply daydreaming. Moreover, if they tried to frame her, then don't blame her for not giving them face. The invigilator was a teacher from Qingtang Middle School. When he heard that she was done, he thought he heard wrong and repeated, "Do you want to check the entire test paper? You didn't score in geography and biology, so you can't be careless in these exams." At this point, Yi Qian vaguely remembered that her name had been passed around by the teachers of various middle schools. She looked up and smiled politely. "Yes, I'm sure I'm done. Thank you, teacher." Chapter 351. All right then, put the test paper on the podium. Don't be in such a hurry to leave. The invigilator raised his hand and gestured for Yi Qian to hand in the test paper first before returning to his seat. However, he heard Yi Qian say, "Teacher, if you have any questions, you can ask me outside. Leave the exam room immediately after handing in the test paper." This is the rule. Yi Qian could tell that the invigilator did not have any ill intentions towards him, but he still maintained a high level of vigilance and would definitely not leave any traces of criticism. The invigilator patted his head and waited for Yi Qian to hand in the test paper and leave the exam room. Then, he took out a piece of draft paper and walked out of the exam room. You came out so quickly. The examinees inside are under a lot of pressure, the invigilator said with a smile. He was expressing his goodwill and did not want Yi Qian to misunderstand that he had ulterior motives. He said, "You did well in the teaching exam. You will achieve your wish." Sigh, Yi Qian's life as a student was not easy. As teachers, they could guess what happened last year if they thought about it. Fortunately, she did not give up on herself. After a year of adjustment, she returned to school. She did not do something stupid that would hurt her loved ones and please her enemies. Where there is destruction, there is hope. Where there is evil, there is good. And in this world, there is always more good than evil. Yi Qian could feel the invigilator's goodwill and his smile deepened. Thank you, teacher. Even a teacher that he did not know was cheering for him. As he spoke, the invigilator's pen flew across the paper and wrote down a question. Just the question alone took him nearly 3 minutes to write. Come, try to solve this question. After drawing another geometric figure, the invigilator put away his pen. Try to solve this question. We are outside, so you can rest assured. Perhaps he thought of something and smiled at Yi Qian. You have handed in the test paper. Don't worry about anything else. It seemed that he had also heard about why Yi Qian tore up the acceptance letter in anger last year. After taking the pen, Yi Qian smiled and did not ask the invigilator why he wrote a question for him at the last minute. He began to solve the advanced mathematics question on the draft paper. From time to time, there would be leaders walking past the classroom. When they saw a student and a teacher standing outside, they thought that they had caught the cheating student and walked over. After the invigilator's explanation, they stayed back to watch Yi Qian solve the questions with interest. They then saw Yi Qian's clean-looking face. Under the teacher's orders, he was able to remain calm and composed. He lowered his head and quietly worked on the questions. Standing at the side, he had a tranquil and distant temperament. The teachers and leaders who surrounded him all smiled approvingly. After he was done, Yi Qian politely bowed to the teachers and school leaders who were looking at him. He said calmly, "I'm done. I'm sorry for wasting your time." Not only were her grades excellent, but her etiquette and manners were impeccable. What was even more surprising was that even at such a young age, when she was the center of attention, she was still calm and composed. Her every movement had a calm and steady aura, as if even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of her, she would not bat an eyelid. There was no doubt that such a student was a good student in the eyes of the teachers. The invigilator took the question that she had only spent 20 minutes to solve and said to another invigilator, "Last year, No. 1 middle school made things difficult for Yi Qian. They even asked her to tear up the acceptance letter. Did the leaders of No. 1 middle school lose their minds? A student like this should be worshipped like a bodhisattva. How dare they make things difficult for others? What's the point of being an auditing student? A genius like her, only she can choose which school she wants to go to." She only used 20 minutes to solve this advanced mathematics question. Chapter 352. Another invigilator took a look and smiled. "Mr. Liu, Yi Qian has participated in the World Mathematical Olympiad and won a gold medal. Your question is really not difficult for her to solve. However, I agree with what you said. The leader of No. 1 middle school is really crazy." Yi Qian became the main character of the entire exam. Not only did the teachers pay attention to her, but even the leaders of the various schools came to see her from time to time. And Yi Qian's name was the name that teachers mentioned the most in class a few years later. Geniuses were born from luck. Yi Qian was like a sword that pierced through the sky and swept through the entire Anyang city. 2 days later, after the exam, all the examinees' exam papers were sealed and sent to the city for marking. Yi Jifan, who had been waiting for news, received a call from old Hu in the afternoon. He answered the phone with a smile, but when he heard the first sentence, "It's not easy," his face instantly changed and he said coldly, "Not easy. Old Hu, aren't you the one who has been handling this? Old Yi, you want Yi Qian's exam papers to be invalid. Aren't you making things difficult for me?" Her exam papers were specially modified. They didn't even go through our hands. The army sent 2 captains, an invigilator, and a notary to the province for marking. You still have the nerve to be angry. I'm not even angry with you. If I didn't find Yi Qian's name familiar, I would have been fucking invited to the Commission for Discipline Inspection for tea. These words were like a clap of thunder. Yi Jifan jumped out of his office chair. What? The army escorted the exam papers to the province for marking. What's going on? Old Hu, don't be angry. Quickly tell me clearly. Clearly. I also want to know what's going on. Last year, this examinee was admitted to number 1 middle school. In the end, this examinee tore up the notice and was suspended for a year. Old Yi, we have been friends for many years. Let's not talk about last year's incident. But this year's incident, I'll pretend that you didn't call me. As for me, I'll pretend that I didn't know. Let's just pretend that nothing happened. Also, let me give you a piece of advice. Don't make any more moves. Be careful not to get into trouble. If it weren't for the fact that they had known each other for so many years, he wouldn't have reminded him. Yi Jifan did not know when the other party had hung up. He did not know how long he had been listening to the beeping sound. He sat there in a daze for a long time before he slowly put down the phone. Originally, he thought that it was just a matter of moving his finger. But now, it seemed that it was not something he could do. If even the military were to step in, then who exactly was it that was protecting Yi Qian? Who was it? Was it someone he couldn't afford to offend? Was it someone he couldn't afford to offend? Yi Jifan thought about a lot of things. There were many things that he did not understand, but there was one thing that he understood. Yi Qian's future was not something that he could cut off or interfere with. So, other than old Uncle Jen who helped Yi Qian behind the scenes, who else could it be? Yi Jifan sat quietly in his office for a while. He looked at the time, then stood up with a tense expression and left the office. Yi Qian did not know that her exam papers had been sent to the provincial capital before she left school. She was talking and laughing with her classmates in the same exam room as her as she walked out of the school gates. She felt a cold and heavy gaze on her. She was talking to her classmates when she raised her head indifferently. Her cold and sharp gaze swept in the direction of the gaze. She saw Yi Jifan standing in front of her in a formal suit with a gloomy expression on his face. When he saw her suddenly look over, he was caught off guard. Soon, he walked over with a cold expression. Chapter 353. Seeing this, Yi Qian's eyes turned slightly cold. He whispered a few words to his classmates, then smiled and said goodbye to them. When Yi Jifan walked over, he maintained his smile and even took the initiative to speak. Mayor Ye's face is unfriendly. Who in Fujian town would dare to offend you? Yi Qian, I've really underestimated you. Uncle Yi Jifan was not very calm. He gloomily stared at his niece, who was giving him a headache. Do you want to force our family to be unhappy before you give up? These words were really unreasonable. However, it was impossible to reason with their family. Yi Qian smiled coldly. Mayor Yi is really interesting. Could it be that all officials are as unreasonable as Mayor Yi? What does it have to do with me whether your family is happy or not? You go your way, and I'll go mine. Mayor Yi, be careful with your words. A dignified mayor was actually being lectured by Yi Qian. Yi Jifan's face darkened. He looked around and saw a few people who looked like teachers looking at him several times. His eyes darkened as he shouted in a low voice, "Don't try to argue with me here. Come over here. I have something to ask you." Being an official was different. His face darkened and he shouted, but his imposing manner did not scare Yi Qian. Instead, it scared the students passing by. Yi Qian raised his eyebrows and looked over with a cold gaze. He said with a smile that was not a smile, "Do I have to go with you just because you ask me? Mayor Yi, your authority is really strong. Sorry, I have a strong temper that cannot be subdued by force. If you talk to me nicely, I might give you some face. Sorry for being so rude. Goodbye." He naturally left as soon as he said he would. Why would he give him any face? Yi Jifan was so angry that he almost lost control of his authority. He quickly stepped forward to block him and said sternly, "Yi Qian, don't forget that I am your uncle." "Uncle? Now you remember that you are my uncle? When you destroyed my future last year, didn't you have a lot of fun destroying it?" Yi Jian, whose expression didn't change, smiled and said coldly with a sarcastic expression, "Basically, you're my enemy, Mayor Yi. Do I still need to speak softly to an enemy?" He enjoyed Mayor Ye's change of expression. TSK TSK TSK, green, white, red. It was really interesting. Last time, I said that Mayor Ye's family better not provoke me. Unfortunately, you didn't listen. You had to kick me out of number 1 middle school, thinking that you destroyed my future. But look, can you destroy my future? Even if I take a year off, I can still take the high school entrance exam. Yi Qian's eyes were very dark and cold. She was staring at the scorching sun. Yi Jifan suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He stared at his niece who really did not put him in her eyes. Yi Jifan sneered softly and said in a deep voice, "Take the high school entrance exam. Yi Qian, you think too highly of yourself. You don't deserve to be compared to Ying. She is in the province's number 1 middle school. What about you? Even if you take the high school entrance exam again, you can forget about surpassing Ying. Yi Qian, you are just a child with no one to rely on. What ability do you have to make things difficult for me? What ability do you have to think that you are better than Ying, who has the help of her parents? Look at you. Once something happens, you can only withdraw. You can't even go to a good high school. Yi Qian, if you are really smart, you should know how to lower your head." Chapter 354. His voice became colder and harsher, and the threat in his voice deepened. No matter who is supporting you, you can only survive if you learn how to lower your head. Otherwise, no matter how good your grades are, there are still people who can make it so that you can't enter a school or study. Yi Jifan had calculated everything. As long as Yi Qian showed even the slightest bit of fear, he would be in the palm of his hand. He thought that by threatening Yi Qian like this, he would be able to see the fear on Yi Qian's face. After all, she was still a child. Faced with the stern reprimand of an adult, she would more or less feel afraid. As long as she was afraid, he would be able to convince her to give up her studies. Then, he would use some tricks to make it so that she would never be able to return to the southern province. His threat made Yi Qian's gaze shift slightly. Was there a test in his threat? A possibility flashed through Yi Jian's mind. After hearing what he said, Yi Jian's chilly laughter was like the clear spring in the mountain stream, so cool that there was a hint of coldness in it. You want me to not be able to enter a school and not be able to study? Mayor Yi is very capable. Then, let's just wait and see. Wait and see. You don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. I want to see how many marks you can get. You want to compare yourself to Ying. Who do you think you are? At this time, Yi Jifan, who was already at a disadvantage, was completely under Yi Qian's control. He looked at Yi Qian with a gloomy gaze and revealed an arrogant expression. Yi Qian, uncle will wait for you to cry and beg me. Who does Ying think she is? I really don't want to compare myself to her. As for crying, please wait and see, Mayor Yi. By the time he finished speaking, Yi Jianqian had already replied with a smile, also, Mayor Yi, be careful that you don't fall from your horse. Officials were most afraid of hearing others say that they had fallen from grace, and Yi Jifan was the same. When he heard this, his expression was already ugly, and now he was so angry that his face turned the color of pig liver. When Yi Qian saw his expression change again, his laughter became even more crisp. When he left, Yi Jifan's face was still as dark as the bottom of a pot. He gloomily looked at Yi Qian's back as he left, and gloomily said, "You refused a toast only to drink a forfeit. Let's see how long you can be arrogant for. You want to compete with Ying. You're overestimating yourself." From the beginning to the end, he did not have the confidence to say that one sentence from him could make Yi Qian unable to read. This was because he knew that this exam was not something he could touch. Yi Jifan knew very well that someone from the army came and hired a notary to send the exam papers to the provincial government for marking. However, he was still angry and wanted to threaten Yi Qian. He also wanted to find out if she really had someone supporting her from behind. This test made him so angry that he almost vomited blood, but he did not get anything out of her. Unfortunately, not only did Yi Qian not take his words to heart, but she also saw through his intention to test if she had someone supporting her. After seeing through his intentions, Yi Qian saw Mayor Yi as a paper tiger who only had a ferocious appearance. After holding back his anger for a while, Yi Jifan got back into the car. That night, he called his daughter, Yi Ying. He did not hide the fact that Yi Qian was coming back for the middle school exams from Yi Ying. It was good to let her be mentally prepared. Yi Ying, who was studying at home and preparing for her exams, laughed as if she had heard a joke. "Dad, so what if she's taking the middle school exams? She'll still be screwed if she gets into a third-rate high school. My teacher said that as long as her grades are in the top 30 of the grade, I'll be in the best class in the liberal arts and science classes. Moreover, a first-rate teacher will be the head teacher." A year had passed, and Yi Ying was more composed than before. When she heard that Yi Qian was coming back to school, she laughed disdainfully. "I still have 2 years to graduate from high school. She still has 3 years. Just you wait. I'll definitely crush her under my feet." Chapter 355. Her confidence made Yi Jifan laugh out loud, and the haze in his eyes disappeared. "Ying is indeed my daughter, Yi Jifan. You have ambition. All right, I'm just letting you know. Since you don't take it to heart, I won't hold you back from your studies." "Yes, and Dad, I won't be going back to the city during the summer break. I'll attend a few cram schools. If there's any news about Yi Qian, give me a call. Later, if she really gets into high school, as her sister, I'll definitely call back to congratulate her." Yi Ying's tone was full of contempt. She was sure that Yi Qian would not amount to anything. Even if she got into high school, it would only be a third-rate school. The father and daughter were able to get along well. Sun Dongqing, who had heard the gist of the conversation, also laughed scornfully. After Yi Ying hung up the phone, the mother and daughter continued to make fun of Yi Qian for a while before they stopped. Yi Qian did not care what the family thought. She returned to Shuku village that day without any psychological burden. She only stayed at home for one night. Before dawn, she went through the long tunnel behind her house and returned to the army that she had not been to for almost 11 months. The military camp was made of iron, and the soldiers were flowing like water. Yi Qian saw many unfamiliar faces as soon as she entered the army. They were the new recruits from last winter. There were also many familiar faces that she could not find anymore. They had retired and returned to their hometown. Little Jian, you've been hiding for almost a year. That's not very kind of you. The political commissar greeted Yi Qian as if she was his child. He patted her on the shoulder. Not bad, you've grown taller. You're no longer the little girl from before. In a year, Yi Qian's height had shot up to 165 centimeters. She was indeed considered a tall girl among the students. After returning to the familiar army, Yi Qian's smile relaxed. She smiled and said, "Of course I have to grow taller. If I don't grow taller, I'll really be short. If I can't reach the height requirement for female soldiers, then I won't even have a place to cry." You're still such a naughty girl. The political commissar was still the same as before. His smile had the dignity of a soldier, but also the concern. Let's go. Let's go to the field and practice 2 laps. Let's see if you've improved. After saying that, he led Yi Qian to the field. After taking a few steps, he looked at Yi Qian and sized him up. Let's go to the Internal Affairs Department to get a set of training clothes. I was wondering why he didn't look right. If he didn't wear his military uniform or training uniform when he came to the army, he would be an anomaly. We can't be outcasts. Thinking about Uncle Jen's request on the phone, the political commissar smiled and said, "Change your clothes and go to the field." Recently, there are a few troublemakers in the army. Come and teach them a lesson. Let's see if they still have the face to be troublemakers. Troublesome soldiers meant that they might be a little outstanding, but they didn't put the class leader in their eyes, and they would often speak ill of her. Before Yi Jian came, a few troublesome soldiers from the international metropolis crushed 2 green flies and threw them into the class leader's mung bean soup to relieve the heat. The poor class leader had diarrhea for an entire night and had even taken a few bottles of intravenous drips. These troublemakers needed to be taught a lesson. After putting on the summer training uniform, the 165 centimeters tall Yi Qian walked out. The political commissar couldn't help but clap his hands. This Yi Qian was no longer the little girl who just entered the army 2 years ago. She was valiant and formidable looking, as straight as a spear. Her military uniform gave off a proud and unyielding aura. When she stood there and gave a standard military salute, the political commissar saw her cold and inviolable military might. She was only 16 years old, and she was still a high school student, but she already had this kind of military might. Chapter 356. Good, good, good. As expected of the soldiers taught by the 2 old revolutionaries. Good job. Yi Qian. She was a soldier when she put on her military uniform, not a little girl. The political commissar did not return the salute. After all, Yi Qian had not yet joined the army. He walked in front of her and personally straightened her clothes and smoothed out the wrinkles on her shoulders. Go, Yi Qian. Your hot-blooded youth should be showered in the military camp. Don't praise me. However, the military camp is indeed my favorite place. Yi Qian tugged at the corner of her clothes and looked at the political commissar with her dark eyes that reflected the sky blue of the military camp. She smiled and said, "Forget about taking care of the troublesome soldiers. I just want to compete with them and see what kind of ability they have to be troublesome soldiers. Then you can't go easy on them." One of the troublesome soldiers comes from a wealthy family. He is indeed quite capable. He has learned self-defense and his physical fitness test was excellent. Amidst the laughter of the political commissar, the first thing Yi Qian did when she returned to the military camp was to fight with the troublesome soldiers. When Yi Qian was angry, the veterans who knew her knew how ruthless she was. When they saw her taking care of the troublesome soldiers, they all laughed and waited to see how Yi Qian would deal with those arrogant new recruits. Yi Qian was the first person who had been in university for 2 years. Because he was too rebellious, his family had used their connections to send him to become a soldier. Yi Qian did not use force first. She stood in front of the bodyguard who had a look of disdain on his face and said with a smile, "Oh, so you're from an international metropolis. You speak English. Okay, let's recite each other's familiar English. First of all, I just graduated from junior high school. Don't feel pressured." Reciting was Yi Qian's strength. The moment she took action, she was able to compete with this soldier who had a sense of superiority. The next day, she challenged this troublesome soldier who thought he was great because he had been in university to a math, physics, and chemistry competition. The sun was still above her head, and her hand was holding a pen. It was noon, but Yi Qian did not move. Her opponent, on the other hand, got a heat stroke because he was nervous. From then on, he never dared to say things like, "I'm good at English, I went to college, you are all country bumpkins." Taking care of another recruit who knew some martial arts was even easier. Dueling was Yi Qian's favorite pastime. It didn't take a few hours. It only took a little more than 10 minutes. Only when the other party's face was bruised and swollen did he stop calmly. "Recruit, remember this. The class leader that you threw flies at has participated in 2 large-scale military exercises, participated in flood relief, and saved several civilians from rolling rocks. What about you? Other than your punching skills, what other inspiring things have you done?" Yi Qian was a girl, and she was also a student. Her actions not only served to intimidate them, but also made these troublemakers feel ashamed. They felt ashamed of their own arrogance and complacency. In just a few days, Yi Qian had finished the task given to him by the political commissar. Without the accompaniment of Uncle Jen and Principal Chin, Yi Qian used her own abilities to gain a firm foothold among the recruits. She quickly gained their trust. How to convince the masses and how to get along with the male recruits was not something that the elders could teach her. She could only rely on herself to figure it out. She had already become brothers with the recruits. The political commissar saw this and called Uncle Jen, who was left in the village. Uncle Jen had left the village for more than half a year. The first thing he did when he returned was to chat with the villagers who came to visit him. He did not care about how Yi Qian was doing in the army. Now that he received a call from the political commissar, he was truly relieved. Chapter 357. That's good, that's good. As long as she can make friends with the new recruits and make them believe in her, I can rest assured. Uncle Jen had always remembered Xia Jinyuan's words, "Yi Qian is not good at integrating into the team and will have a hard time in the army in the future." Therefore, when Yi Qian went to the army, he immediately called the political commissar. This was why Yi Qian had to deal with the troublemakers as soon as he entered the army. Principal Chin was also very busy when he came back. By the time he finished his work and contacted Yi Qian, it was already early August. It just so happened that Yi Qian called on the day of the results. She was still in the army and answered the call from the sentry box. "You did well, girl. You got what you wanted." Before Principal Chin could report the results, Yi Qian, who was already confident, said with a smile, "Even if you don't tell me, I know how I did." After that, he reported the results. It was only 5 points lower than the actual score. Without the biology and geography scores, except for the Chinese essay, which was deducted 3 points, Yi Qian got full marks for all the other subjects. Yi Qian even lowered the score for the Chinese essay by 5 points. Yi Qian did not become the top scholar in the province, but he still got 4th place in the province. When the principal of number 1 middle school found out about Yi Qian's results, he regretted it so much that his intestines turned green. They had forced such an excellent student to leave the school last year. However, when he thought about Yi Jifan's current status and the fact that the Provincial Education Bureau had warned him not to publicize Yi Qian's results, the principal could only sigh inwardly. He did not show it on his face at all. When the provincial high school entrance exam results came out, Yi Jifan, who had been keeping an eye on it, did not let it go. He immediately called old Hu, whom he knew from the Municipal Education Bureau. Yi Qian's results had been intentionally concealed by the Provincial Education Bureau. Old Hu, who was from the Municipal Education Bureau, naturally could not find out anything. If he could not find out anything, it meant that he did not get into the school. I only have the results of those who have been admitted to high school. Yi Qian's name is not on my list. Old Hu scanned the system but couldn't find it. When he saw Yi Jifan paying so much attention to the examinee's results, he couldn't help but feel puzzled. I say, old Yi, why are you so concerned about this examinee's results? If I remember correctly, you only have one daughter, Yi Ying, right? She seemed to have thought of something and tried to tease him. The candidate's surname is also Yi. Could she be an illegitimate daughter that you don't want to acknowledge? You are indeed a scholar. You have a rich imagination. He's a distant relative of mine. His parents have some conflicts with my family. I'm just asking. Knowing that Yi Qian didn't get into high school, Yi Jifan was overjoyed. He didn't want old Hu to probe any further. He happily said, let's have dinner together tonight. Don't you want to follow Secretary Wu's path? Deputy Tseng has a dinner appointment with Secretary Wu. If you're free, come along. This sentence was to old Hu's liking. He didn't care about other people's business. He smiled and said thank you before hanging up. When Yi Qian didn't get into the school, Yi Jifan was happy. Naturally, Yi Ying and Sun Dongqing were also happy. Stupid girl, I told you she's a good-for-nothing. Look, it's obvious that she doesn't have the life to study. Sun Dongqing looked at her daughter who had blossomed into a flower. She couldn't hide the pride in her heart. She said harshly, Ying, your sister didn't get into the school. You should give her a call later to comfort her. Yi Ying, who was full of arrogance, raised her chin slightly. Her voice was thin and sharp as she laughed. Mom, you're right. I'll call the village chief's house tonight and ask her to answer the phone. Chapter 358. The arrogant Yi Ying lifted her chin slightly and laughed in a thin and sharp voice. Mom, you're right. I'll call the village chief's house tonight and get her to answer the phone. She snorted with a look of disdain and said with a vicious look, she thinks she can compete with me. She's just an orphan. I can bully her however I want. Yi Qian had to answer Yi Ying's call so that she could show off her superiority. However, Yi Qian was not around, so she could only hold back her pride and ridicule. On the third day after the results were released, Yi Qian did not even know her ranking in the province for the middle school exams. At this moment, Anjusin gave her a fierce bear hug and punched her in the back. Yi Qian felt a little uneasy when she was blocked by her classmates who had graduated from middle school and had not contacted her for almost a year. Especially when she saw the unfriendliness on their faces, she was prepared to apologize. Anjusin, your greeting gift is too warm. My back is going to bruise from your punches. Damn. It's already a good thing that I didn't cut ties with you. So what if you received a few punches from me? Do you have any objections? Do you know how long you've been missing? It's been almost a year. Damn. We've been asking around, but no one has seen you. And Jessen's eyes reddened as she spoke. We were all worried about you. Where have you been for the past year? Zhang Na squeezed over from the side. I haven't hugged you yet. We'll start the scolding session after I hug you. As she spoke, she glared at Yi Qian and opened her arms to hug her. Yi Qian, just wait to be scolded by us old classmates. She hugged Yi Qian tightly and heard her slightly choked voice. Zhang Bin, who had entered the province's #1 middle school because of his specialty, stood at the back like a pillar. He looked at the girls hugging each other and laughed. Yi Qian, why don't we hug too? Damn. Get lost. Trying to take advantage of me. And Jiaxin kicked him in return. Learn from Zhou Liao. He's a gentleman. It's more polite to stand aside. Zhou Liao pushed up his glasses out of habit. After thinking for a while, he slowly smiled and said, I'm not a gentleman. I'm waiting for the girl to finish hugging me before I do it myself. 1 year of high school had changed the shy Zhou Liao of the past. Jane, let's ignore them. Now, Zhang Bin is the boy who makes the girls in school scream. He plays basketball and is handsome. Just like before, and Jiaxin put her arm around Yi Qian's shoulder and looked at Zhang Bin provocatively. So what if he's handsome? You still can't hug Yi Qian. Just like when they were in junior high school, the two of them started arguing after a few words. Looking at them, Yi Qian knew that his friendship with them hadn't changed because of time. He smiled as he watched the two of them quarrel again. After exchanging a glance with Zhang Na, they both smiled knowingly. As for why, it was probably the thoughts of those young men and women. After laughing and arguing, the few of them sat in the bamboo forest behind Yi Qian's house. Each of them had a bamboo chair and held watermelons that had been soaked in well water in their hands. They talked about their high school lives and their academic results. After chatting for a while, Yi Qian found out that the 4 of them had taken part in the competition together and all of them had chosen to enroll in the city's #1 middle school. Zhang Na and Zhou Liao had always been top scorers in their classes, so getting into the city's #1 middle school was a given. Zhang Bin was admitted to the province's #1 middle school as a student with a specialty. Chapter 359. And Jiaxin was good at her subjects and applied for #1 middle school. In the end, it was her geologist father who stepped in and spent money to get her into #1 middle school in the province. It was indeed a joyous occasion that 2 of her former classmates had entered #1 middle school in the province. How did you do this time? Don't tell me you got into #1 middle school. The few of them were concerned about where Yi Qian would be going to school this year. Zhou Liao, who was more mature, asked, We didn't come here for any other reason. We just wanted to know where you will be studying so that we can keep in touch. As soon as he spoke, Yi Qian could clearly feel the nervousness on their faces. They were worried that she would be upset. Ming Yan's eyes moved like water in the swaying bamboo shadows. Looking at their nervous faces, a bright smile bloomed on her face. Yi Qian raised her eyebrows and said leisurely, You should have done well in the exam. You have also received the notice. Damn. You scared me to death. After Jiaxin heard this, she let out a long sigh of relief and took a deep breath. She had been holding her breath, waiting for Yi Qian to speak. Great, great. When school starts, I can tell that bitch Ying. Let's see if she can still be so smug. She screamed happily as she jumped up from the bamboo chair and pounced on Yi Qian. She was so fierce and inaccurate that Zhang Bin cried out in shock, Tomboy, be gentle. He was afraid that she would fall. You're a human sandbag. You're really heavy. Yi Qian was also worried that she would fall. He quickly stood up and hugged her. He joked, You're already a year older. Why are you still like a child? Zhang Na smiled and glanced at the nervous Zhang Bin. She pursed her lips and laughed alone. Tell me, where will you be studying? Hurry up and tell me. And Jiaxin, who had pounced on him, sneaked her hand under Yi Qian's armpit and tickled him. She asked cheerfully, "Hurry up and tell me, or Nana and I will do it together." Tickling was nothing. Yi Qian opened his arms and smiled. "Come, tickle me all you want. I won't laugh when you touch me. You're so stubborn." After scratching for a while, Anjusin gave up. She curled her lips and said, "If you're not afraid of this, what else are you afraid of?" She wanted to ask more, but Zhang Bin pulled her back and secretly gave her a look. Although he majored in sports, he had a father who was a policeman. Zhang Bin's temperament was also extremely meticulous, and he knew when to stop. "Don't ask any more. Why don't you use your brain if you don't have results in geography and biology?" After Yi Qian started chatting with Zhou Liao, Zhang Bin secretly reminded Anjusin, "Can't you see that we're not asking anymore? Yup, stop talking so much." Zhou Liao noticed that Zhang Bin was obviously warning the tomboy. He smiled and said to Yi Qian, "I don't know how Ying found out that she spent money to buy a school. Whenever she sees her, she will definitely mock her. You also know that tomboys can't tolerate it." Ying said that she couldn't tolerate it. Once she said it, they started arguing. In the end, both sides suffered. After all, they weren't from the same school, so Zhou Liao's knowledge was limited. He only knew bits and pieces about Zhang Bin and other students who entered the provincial first high school. Yi Ying's name. He hadn't heard it for almost 2 months. When he heard it again, Yi Qian's eyes turned cold. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, Yi Ying won't dare to say such things again." Chapter 360. You. Zhou Liao's eyes lit up. He looked at his classmate, who had always been indifferent, in surprise. Then, he let out a long "oh" and smiled sincerely. "Yi Qian, you always surprise people. It may be a surprise to you, but it must be a shock to some people." She raised her eyebrows slightly. Her casual and indifferent temperament changed instantly. There was a frosty air about her. "Thank you for your concern. Let's keep in touch." Zhou Liao pushed his glasses and reached out his hand. "We can't go to the same high school, but I hope we can go to the same university and continue our friendship." "I hope so too." Yi Qian reached out to shake his hand and smiled. "Continue our friendship." This was a promise. Regardless of whether it would be in the future or not, at least he was her classmate, her friend, and she sincerely hoped they could continue their friendship in university. On the other side, Anjusin raised her voice and said cheerfully, "I'll give Ying a call when I get back." "Ha ha ha, I want to anger her to death. Classmaten, I don't want there to be a situation where I can't study. So, please keep this a secret for me. It won't be too late for you to tell me after I finish the admission procedures." Yi Qian, who already knew that his results were concealed by the Provincial Education Bureau, immediately stopped her with a smile. "I really can't tell you now. I'll only tell the 4 of you." After a short silence, there were 4 voices of assurance in unison. Uncle Jen, who was enjoying the cool air in his house, heard the laughter coming from behind the house. The old man, who was lying in the rocking chair, gently fanned himself with his eyes closed. He didn't want to disturb the gathering of the young men. Since school was about to start, the 4 of them stayed over at Yi Qian's house for a night and left early the next morning. Anjusin was still reluctant to leave after getting into the car. She squeezed out 2 drops of tears and held Yi Qian's hand. "You heartless person. You must remember to write me a letter, or else. This is too embarrassing. Hurry up and pull her into the car." Yi Qian, who was covered in goosebumps, pulled his hand away and motioned for Zhang Bin to pull her into the car. Everyone in the car was watching. Anjusin laughed heartily. The car started, and Yi Qian saw 4 hands reaching out of the car window, waving goodbye to him. This was what friends were like. Because they were worried about you, they traveled thousands of miles just to see you. A week after they left, Yi Qian walked out of the village again with the letter of acceptance in his hand. He went to the province to study alone. Compared to last year, his state of mind was different this year. The car drove along the mountain road, bringing Yi Qian to a vast space. That was the provincial capital where she would be living for the next 2 years. Since someone was spouting nonsense and thought that it was a great thing to be admitted into the provincial first school, then she naturally had to walk in front of her and tell her that it was not a great thing to be admitted into the provincial first school. If she could pass the exam the first time, she could also pass the exam the second time. The provincial first high school. In the end, Yi Qian chose the provincial first high school. The train ticket was the same as before. It left at 8:30 p.m. and arrived at the provincial capital train station early in the morning. Yi Qian, who was taking the train to the provincial capital for the 3rd time, quickly found her seat. This time, she did not buy a sleeper ticket. Instead, she chose a more affordable seat ticket. She rode the bumpy train all the way to the provincial capital. When Yi Qian got off the train, she smelled like sweat. She ran to a travel agency near the train station and spent a few yuan to take a shower. She then changed into a clean set of clothes before coming out. Chapter 361. The travel agency was quite close to the train station. As soon as Yi Qian walked out of the travel agency, she suddenly heard a search broadcast from the train station. The broadcast was looking for a girl named Yi Qian. Student, short-haired, 165 centimeters tall. Name, identity, hairstyle, height, all of these were possible. Yi Qian froze for a moment as she held on to her luggage and thought of a possibility. Could it be that Uncle Qin knew from Grandpa Zhen that she was coming and came to get her early in the morning? Thinking of this possibility, Yi Qian ran to the broadcasting room of the train station as fast as the wind after hearing it. The broadcast room was in the train station. Yi Qian found a staff member. The staff member looked at her student ID and took out his walkie-talkie to contact the broadcast room. Broadcast room, Yi Qian is in Gate A of the train station lobby. Yi Qian is in Hall A of the train station lobby. After repeating this, he said to Yi Qian, "Just wait here. The person looking for you will be here soon." He looked at Yi Qian and said sternly, "Children shouldn't run around. The train station is crowded and messy. Someone like you who is fair and clean, and also a student, is a perfect target for human traffickers." He treated Yi Qian as a child who had been separated from her parents. She didn't argue and accepted the kind reminder politely, "I'm sorry for the trouble." "Then I'll just wait here, right? Stand on my side. Don't run around." The staff member was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He probably had a child around Yi Qian's age at home. He spoke as if he was reprimanding his own child. "It will take about 10 minutes to get here from the broadcast room. Just wait here, okay?" Yi Qian always gave people the impression that she was well-behaved and obedient, especially when she smiled. When her clear eyes curved into crescents, she was the standard image of a well-behaved girl. She quickly nodded and didn't say anything. The staff member didn't have the heart to say anything more. Instead, he softened his tone and said, "You students don't know anything. You think you're an adult now that you've grown up. How much do you know about the evil in people's hearts? Uncle isn't scolding you on purpose. I'm just reminding you." She smiled slightly. Although she was standing obediently to the side, she was like a winter plum blossom swaying with a faint fragrance. She was proud and elegant. "Little fox, your appearance is really bewitching." Fortunately, I met you in the mountains and saw your boldness. Otherwise, I might have been fooled by your obedient appearance." Yi Jian, who was chatting with the staff, suddenly felt a gaze full of tenderness fall on her from the front. She thought it was Headmaster Qin, so she looked up happily. Her palm-sized lotus face was smiling, like the dew on a lotus leaf in the morning, so clear and pure. Uncle was already at the tip of her tongue, but she quickly swallowed the word back down her throat. Yi Qian was shocked when she saw who was looking at her. A handsome man stood in front of her. His features were handsome, and he exuded a noble aura. He was wearing khaki trousers made of linen and a pure white shirt. It was casual wear, but on him, it not only made him look casual, but also incomparably elegant. It had been more than a year since she saw the dangerous man she had forgotten. Yi Jian's heart skipped a beat when she saw him again. Her reaction was, "Why is he here?" Chapter 362. The staff member looked at Yi Qian, then turned to look at the man walking over. She laughed and said, "Your brother is here. Hurry, stick close to your brother next time. Don't get separated again. You're making people worry." She mistook Yi Qian and Xia Jinyuan as a pair of siblings. There was no other reason other than the fact that the two of them had a similar temperament. They were like steel and spears, exuding a biting cold aura. Before she could explain, Xia Jinyuan, who was dressed casually, walked over and politely apologized to the staff member. "Sorry for the trouble." Even the words he used were the same as Yi Qian's. What made Yi Qian feel most awkward was that after taking 2 steps, the staff member turned back to look and muttered, "What kind of parents do they look like to have such a pair of good-looking children? They're a little too handsome." Both of them had sharp ears and eyes. No matter how soft the staff member's voice was, they could hear it clearly. The man who was as white as snow in spring laughed. The staff member was quite thoughtful. Wasn't he her brother? However, the word brother was different from the word brother. He really wanted to hear her call him brother. "You're stunned just because I'm here." Xia Jinyuan's clear voice came slowly. There was a hint of a smile in his voice, and it was as intoxicating as wine. "Brother came from afar. Why is my little sister so cold? She didn't even give me a warm hug." There was no warmth, no surprise, and no surprise. Her expression only said, "Why are you here?" Her indifference made Xia Jinyuan, who had been waiting for her for a few hours, feel sad. "His little fox, you're really cruel. Even if it was an old friend meeting, there should at least be a little surprise." However, she was so unique. Why did he even appear in front of her? Yi Qian choked on the words brother and little sister. Her fair face flushed red. She glanced at him and said calmly, "I don't have a brother." "Captain Xia, don't randomly acknowledge people as family." It had been a year since they last met, but Xia Jinyuan was still the same Xia Jinyuan from a year ago. He was still flirting with her and teasing her. "I'm older than you, so it's fine for you to call me brother." The shade of crimson on her face was truly breathtaking, not a bit more, not a bit less. Her natural beauty was perfect with light makeup and heavy makeup. The smile on Xia Jinyuan's face deepened. He hadn't seen her for more than a year, and the little fox had grown up again. The familiar Xia Jinyuan was back. Yi Qian was alarmed. He discreetly put some distance between them and said calmly, "I'm not used to calling other people big brother. Also, why are you here? Did Uncle Qin come with you?" When she spoke, she calmed herself down. Because of the man in front of her, Yi Qian felt that time had treated him too well. He was not a soldier serving in the military, but a young man who was as white as snow in spring. He was elegant and radiant. His calm tone concealed Yi Qian's intention to put some distance between them. Just as Xia Jinyuan thought, she was not surprised at all when facing him. Xia Jinyuan, who quickly recovered from his sadness, raised his eyebrows and naturally took the luggage in her hand. He smiled and said, "Uncle Chen is very busy now. It takes some time to get used to a new working environment. He's not free today, so he asked me to pick you up at the train station." Uncle Chen is not free. How would he know? Yi Qian stopped and did not immediately follow him. Xia Jinyuan took 2 steps forward and realized that she was still standing in the same place. He smiled and walked back. Chapter 363. With his other hand holding the luggage, he freed up his right hand, which was beside Yi Qian's shoulder. He skillfully raised his right hand and wrapped it around Yi Qian's slender shoulder. "This time, I have to keep a close eye on you. I almost lost you just now. Luckily, there's a broadcast. Otherwise, where would I have found you? How am I going to explain this to Uncle Chin when I get back?" While Yi Qian kept her gaze forward, she frowned and glanced at the hand on her shoulder. It was slender and beautiful, like the hand that played the piano in the Golden Palace. But she knew how powerful and sharp his movements were when he fired the gun. Uncle Chin said that he works in the provincial capital. He'll come and look for me when school starts. Do you know where Uncle Chin works? Yi Qian frowned but didn't shake off his hand. Even though she didn't like being so close to him, she tolerated it. It was a pleasure to have a guest from afar. She was from the southern province, so she had to maintain the courtesy and reserve of a southern province citizen. Yi Qian's tolerance made the wolf Xia Jinyuan smile. He used Uncle Chen as an excuse to get close to her. She had no choice but to accept it. Uncle Chen's workplace. He said he wanted to give you a surprise, so I can't tell you now. Let's go and have breakfast first. She smelled faintly of soap, which was unique to her. It was a refreshing fragrance. You can't register until 9. It's still early. It was only 6:00, and the sun hadn't driven away the coolness of the night. With Xia Jinyuan's arm around her shoulder, Yi Qian pursed her lips. When they entered a kanji shop, he let go of her and secretly sighed. She waved her hand gently, as if doing so could get rid of the minty smell he left on her. The breakfast shop was doing well. Yi Jian chose a table near the glass wall and sat down. The tables near her were filled with parents accompanying their children to enroll in school. While eating breakfast, the parents did not forget to lecture their children. One moment, they told their children to be bolder in school, the next moment, they told them not to be reckless. Yi Qian smiled helplessly. Poor parents. Sometimes, their words didn't make sense. A boy was annoyed by his parents nagging. He put his spoon in his bowl and retorted, "Mom, can't you let me have breakfast in peace? I'm 16 years old, not 6 years old. I wonder if I'm retarded if you keep saying that." Fine, I won't say it." When the mother saw this, she immediately gave in and pushed half of the salted duck egg over. "Eat the egg. Go report after you're done." Only parents would accept their children unconditionally. Yi Qian quietly lowered her eyes and chuckled. Just like Uncle Chen and Grandpa Jen, they were strict with her but also unconditionally tolerant of her. Even though she didn't have parents to protect her, she was glad that she had 2 kind elders who cared about her. Xia Jinyuan, who had just returned from the cashier, stood not far away. He gazed softly at Yi Qian, who was sitting quietly like a painting. His deep eyes were dark like the occasional flickering light in the depths of the ocean. It was so dark that no one could guess what he was thinking at that moment. He walked over and sat across from her. His deep and handsome eyes contained a faint smile. He looked at Yi Qian and smiled. A bowl of congee, a salted duck egg, and a bowl of youtiao. This is the most sumptuous breakfast I've had this year. Chapter 364. Do you want to tell me what kind of breakfast I had from February to May? Yi Qian pulled out a tissue and handed it to him. You seem to be very hot. You're sweating. There were small beads of sweat on his forehead. Xia Jinyuan didn't take it. Instead, he leaned forward and said with a half-smile, "Since I went through so much trouble to pick you up, can you help me wipe my sweat?" He really wanted to tease her all the time. He knew that she wouldn't dare to do it, but he couldn't help but want to try. Seeing that her hand that was holding the tissue stiffened, Xia Jinyuan narrowed his eyes and smiled. Such a man with such a handsome face balanced the majesty of a soldier and also blended into the atmosphere of the mortal world. He was so lively and elegant. "Hey, I'll do it myself." Xia Jin, who knew when to stop, raised his eyebrows. As he spoke, he reached out to take the tissue from Yi Jian's hand. "You can't even wipe your sweat," a shadow flashed in front of his eyes. The tissue that should have been within his reach was pressed softly against his forehead and pressed down on it. He was completely caught off guard. She really did wipe his sweat for him. "I'm just wiping your sweat. I spent the summer in the army and I've wiped the sweat of countless male soldiers when I was competing with them." Yi Jian purposely used her wrist to block his line of sight, blocking the teasing in his eyes that she couldn't take. She said calmly, "It's just a small matter. Captain Xia, you can just say it next time." Is he still trying to tease me until I feel uncomfortable? I have to let him know that he doesn't think I can't fight back. With a sly smile on his face, Yi Qian wiped his sweat. When he noticed that Xia Jinyuan's expression was a little stiff, his smile became even more sly. "Xia Jinyuan, you finally have a day like this." Xia Jinyuan, who didn't expect to be teased by Yi Qian, laughed. His low and deep laughter was like the strings of a zither, pleasing to the ear. "Not bad. You've improved." Yi Qian gently wiped his forehead from left to right. He understood the meaning behind Xia Jinyuan's words and smiled calmly. "It's normal to improve. Last October, I went to the desert and ate the first raw snake meat in my life. I spent the spring festival in the desert. Captain Xia, if I don't improve, Grandpa Zhen and Uncle Qin will be disappointed." Her voice was really clear without a trace of impurity, but the words she said always made him feel helpless. The improvement he was referring to the fact that she dared to occasionally tease him. However, Yi Qian casually turned all of this into her own improvement and the nurturing of her two elders. Look at how interesting it was when the little fox made her move. "Okay, Captain Xia, please accept my gratitude." After he finished wiping his sweat, Yi Qian naturally withdrew his hand. However, Xia Jinyuan was faster. He grabbed her wrist and raised his eyebrows. He smiled and said, "Although soldiers have to be swift and decisive in their work, they still need to be meticulous in all aspects." As he said this, Yi Qian's expression changed slightly. He looked at her vigilantly and didn't withdraw his hand. Although she dared to go against him, she was just a smart and innocent little fox. No matter how sly she was, she would still be at a disadvantage because of her naivety. Xia Jinyuan held her wrist with just the right amount of strength to clamp her wrist. There was a faint smile in his dark eyes. "Little fox, there is sweat on my neck too. You didn't wipe it off." His little fox was at a disadvantage because of her naivety, and he was the one who took advantage of her. If someone else dared to do this, he would have cut off their claws. Chapter 365. How could the wolf, who was full of ideas, let go of the fox in front of him so easily? When they were in the county town of Machadi, he had said that the next time they met, he would ask for some interest. This interest had just begun. Sure enough, when it came to playing a game with him, one could never let one's guard down. Wiping sweat was not a simple task. Smiling, Yi Qian glanced at the hand he was holding, then met his smiling gaze. The more he fought, the braver he became. Yi Qian glanced at the clean tissue, then slowly said, "Captain Xia, you have to let go of my hand first before I can take the tissue." This man had a nasty side to him that always caught her off guard. She thought he would let go, but unexpectedly, he pushed his luck even further. "You can take the tissue with one hand, and you can also wipe your sweat with the other. Do you think I'll cooperate?" Captain Xia. Yi Qian did not try to break free, but kept a faint smile on his face. "If you don't let go, then I'll have to ask you to wipe your sweat yourself, Captain Xia." From the moment he appeared in front of her, the man with the temperament of a mountain had covered up the remaining panic on his face. Also, the sweat that flowed down his neck and into his collar told her that he was indeed in a hurry. Because of this, she did not refuse when he asked her to wipe his sweat, because there was no way she could refuse. His progress was extraordinary. If it was before, the little fox would have said, "Xia Jinyuan, if you don't let go, I'm going to get angry." Then, she would stare at him with her star-like eyes. Her eyes were so clear that only his figure could be seen. Now that they had taken a step, it was even more interesting. He stepped forward, and she met him head-on. It was like a spear against a shield, neither of them had the upper hand. Naturally, he had to let go of her hand. He did not really want her to wipe the sweat on his neck. Xia Jinyuan pulled out the tissue and smiled lazily. "The porridge is here. Fill your stomach first. As for the sweat, I'll wipe it myself." Yi Qian retracted her hand and gently put aside the sweat-soaked tissue that she was still holding in her hand. Naturally, she retracted her hand and hid it under the table. Her fingers were trembling. Just now, her fingertips had inadvertently brushed against his damp forehead. It was as if she had been burned by fire, and her wrist, which he had grabbed, had been burned to the point that she was a little flustered. Going up against Xia Jinyuan again was definitely a game of chess. She had no choice but to put in 120% of her energy and focus on the game with him. However, it was undeniable that such a game was rather satisfying. It only took a few seconds for Xia Jinyuan to wipe off his sweat. Before he could even feel it, the touch of her fingers had already disappeared. Fortunately, he was quick enough to grab her wrist. He could feel the temperature of her skin at such a close distance and reminisce about the delicate touch of her skin. Also, when she looked at him, her eyes were filled with helplessness but would not back down. It was so interesting. Breakfast was served to both of them. Xia Jinyuan was no longer teasing Yi Qian. He even prepared a spoon for her and handed it to her. As if the wind had just blown by, he smiled indifferently and said, "It's still early. Come, tell me about what happened in the desert. Is there anything interesting you can tell me?" He was no longer doing anything that would give her a headache. Yi Qian heaved a sigh of relief and scooped a spoonful of vegetable porridge. He lowered his gaze and looked at the crystal-clear porridge and the crispy green vegetables. He said indifferently, "There are no interesting things in the desert. There are only dangerous and life-threatening things. Quicksand, poisonous snakes, dehydration. I encountered all of them in half a month." Chapter 366. When she recalled the training in the desert, it felt like it had just happened yesterday. When she mentioned the desert, Xia Jinyuan also thought about his 70-day test flight in the desert. During the test flight, there were 2 engine problems and he almost lost his life in the desert. But when she brought it up again, there was no danger in his memories, only joy. A barren land with no life, an endless stretch of yellow sand isolated you from the rest of the world. When I heard travelers passing by, I felt like I was still living on Earth and not in outer space. When Yi Qian talked about those precious memories that would not fade even when she grew old, her whole body lit up. Her eyes were like the sun, full of vigor and vitality, so bright that it made people dizzy. The sun shone gently from behind her, as if she was bathed in holy light. She raised her eyebrows and talked about the various things that happened in the desert. The faint sunlight shone, stunning not only the time but also the people who looked at her. Deputy Qin, sorry to keep you waiting. Outside the glass, a man in a suit and leather shoes jogged over. It was early in the morning and he was still wearing a tie. He ran over to a man who looked especially young from the back. He was also in a suit, but he was as elegant as a kaffir lily. Sorry, I made a mistake at work and did not pick you up on time. The sound of panting and hurried footsteps could be heard clearly through the glass wall. Yi Qian, who was talking, looked outside and saw the figure of a man walking out from the side of the main pillar of the building. His gaze fell on Yi Qian's face. When he walked out from behind the pillar, he smiled slightly, as if to explain that he just happened to be standing behind the pillar to avoid the sun. This was a man who looked as elegant as a poem, and also a man who was very cultured. He was wearing a pair of straight, light brown trousers without a single wrinkle, a white shirt, and a tie of the same series as the trousers. He was formal and elegant in every aspect. Just one look and you could tell that this person was well educated. Yi Qian was stunned. He didn't understand why a stranger would explain himself to him. Outside, the man who was addressed as Vice Qin by the staff smiled faintly. He had excellent etiquette in his bones. It's fine. Everyone in the station knows that I don't know the way. It's my own fault. It has nothing to do with you. Where is the car parked? This way, please. The car is parked on the side of the road. When the staff heard this, even Yi Qian could sense that he secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Xia Jinyuan, on the other hand, took another look at him. His deep eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was trying to guess his identity. He looked away faster than Yi Qian. Seeing that her attention was also on the outside, he said in a cool voice, "How long have you been in the desert? You don't look like you've been there for a long time. You don't look like an African." Yi Qian looked up casually, as if he had inadvertently seen the scenery. He looked away and smiled at Xia Jinyuan. I was there for 4 months. At the time, I didn't think it was very hard. Now that I think about it, it was actually quite hard. The desert is very hard. You were able to endure 4 months. Not bad. He didn't mention that he had also gone to the desert. He had gone to the desert for the country. It was an A-level secret in Red Heart. He couldn't even reveal a word about it to his loved ones. Chapter 367. Yi Qian thought about it, then shook his head and said, "You can't use the word endure. You can't use the word endure when it comes to what you like and what you're interested in. You should use the word enjoy. I really enjoy this process. You've seen my training plan. I like every aspect of it, so I enjoy this process." At the time, he had seen that the training plan was based on the Delta Special Forces training plan. He had also hinted that it might be a little difficult for a young girl to persevere through it. Uncle Chin smiled and replied, "You'll know after you try. You'll know after you try." Actually, Uncle Chin already knew that the little fox in front of him would be able to persevere and enjoy it. Now that he heard her say that she enjoyed the training process with his own ears, Xia Jinyuan finally understood how tough she was. How could Yi Jifan defeat a little fox like her just by messing with her? Did he want to continue messing with the little fox's exams this year? Wasn't he afraid of ruining his own career? Xia Jinyuan drove over, so he wasn't in a hurry to leave. He waited for the surrounding customers to disperse before his elegant smile faded a little and he said, Yijifan has someone backing him up. Little fox, try not to meet him alone in the future. But you don't have to worry. Principal Chow of the Provincial First High School is not a simple person. Once you enter the school, he won't be able to make things difficult for you. Yi Qian's eyelids twitched slightly as he gently placed the salted eggshell in his hand on the table. His gaze was fixed on Xia Jinyuan, who had revealed a lot of information in a casual tone. He pursed his lips slightly and said in a deep voice, Captain Xia, do you know something? Yi Qian's sharp senses made Xia Jinyuan ponder for a moment before he said, before your exam, Yijifan contacted someone from the Municipal Education Bureau. After the exam was closed, he contacted this person again. But he is indeed someone. Just because of a few words, he immediately realized that your exam wasn't something he could interfere with and immediately gave up. He even let someone from the Municipal Education Bureau have a taste of his medicine. Xia Jinyuan's deep and cold eyes stared at the inexperienced girl who had a hard shell to protect herself. He said softly, word by word, so, little girl, you need to avoid him. Don't go head-to-head with him before your wings are fully grown. Because he has someone backing him up, right? Yi Qian narrowed her eyes slightly. Her indifferent expression made it seem as if she already knew some key points. She smiled faintly and said, that's why he can be promoted so quickly. It's because someone is supporting him, right? Her sharp senses and expression made Xia Jinyuan's eyes change slightly. She was unusually sharp and could see the crux of the problem at a glance. She could even calmly say that Yijifan had someone backing him up. Why did it feel like she already knew? Xia Jinyuan nodded with some doubts in his heart. The smile on his handsome face had long disappeared and was replaced by a serious and cold expression. That's right. It's precisely because he has someone backing him up that you absolutely can't go head-to-head with him. So there really is someone backing him up. Yi Qian slightly lowered his gaze. The corners of his mouth curved and his eyes gradually darkened. In her previous life, Yijifan's official career had been smooth sailing up until her death. He had gone from a small-town mayor to the second-in-command of a large province. If there had been no help in between, how could he have risen so quickly? And how could Ying have married into a prestigious family and become a young mistress? Chapter 368. As for Uncle Jen, he had also avoided Yijifan. After transferring her household registration, he had never interacted with Yijifan again. From this, it could be seen that Uncle Jen probably knew a little about him. In the end, when Uncle Chen left the school, wasn't it also to avoid the sharp edge? For her, the two elders had taught her to be self-reliant and independent. Only then could she go further and reach the peak that even Yi Ying could not reach. She could reach the peak where no one could threaten her. Putting all these things together, it was clear to her that Yijifan had someone backing him up. And she had to be so strong that even the person backing him couldn't do anything about it. Yijifan was in politics, and she was in the military. As long as she had a firm foothold in the military, even if someone wanted to touch her, they would have to think twice about it. After Xia Jinyuan confirmed his suspicions, Yi Qian felt a lot more relaxed. He raised his head and smiled faintly. I've never met him head-on. Last year, No. 1 middle school's actions made me realize that no matter how good my grades were, I would still be under his control if I stayed in school. So, I tore up my acceptance letter and left AY City. Yijifan's current sphere of influence is still limited to the city. As for the province, from the moment I received the acceptance letter from the provincial No. 1 middle school, I knew that his influence had yet to reach the province. No matter how fast he gets promoted, it's impossible for him to get promoted every 2 years. As for me, before he reaches the province, I will leave Nan Nan province. At this point, Yi Qian paused for a moment. Under Xia Jinyuan's increasingly gloomy gaze, he leisurely said, I won't meet him head-on, but I have to let him know that I, Yi Qian, am not someone who can be easily bullied. With Yi Jifan's cautious and suspicious personality, he must also be wondering if I have someone backing me up. After weighing the pros and cons, his actions in the open will only become smaller and smaller, but his actions in the dark will also have to be wary of my backer. Why is he so certain that I have someone backing me up? It's very simple. I'm sure Xia Jinyuan has already guessed it. Not only did he guess it, but he also felt it. The little fox in front of him was indeed a fox. If it continued to be so smart, it would ascend to the heavens. She made use of Yi Jifan's suspicions to reveal her strength step by step in front of him. She even told Yi Jifan that she wasn't worried about not being able to go to school at all. Of course, she wasn't worried. How could someone as smart as her not be able to go to school? Even if in the eyes of others, Yi Qian had fallen on hard times and had to stop studying, in the end, she used a year to complete the Special Forces training and returned to school to retake the exam. She used her own strength to tell everyone that Yi Qian was not someone who would admit defeat easily. Thinking of this, Xia Jinyuan casually leaned back in his chair and asked with a smile, Aren't you afraid that Yi Jifan will really tamper with your exam papers? When three people form a wall, public opinion can melt metal. I handed in my exam papers early and solved the questions in front of so many invigilators and school leaders. After the exam, the students from the other schools also knew about my performance, Yi Qian. Yi Jifan wants to tamper with my exam papers. If the person who agreed to his request isn't stupid, they'll know that it won't go according to his wishes after a little investigation. Moreover, when I came back, Principal Chow personally told me that regardless of my results, I can still go to number 1 middle school in the province. Last year, Director Li of number 1 middle school in the capital also wrote to me. As long as I'm willing to return to school, I can use his recommendation letter to enroll in number 1 middle school. Chapter 369. I have a way out and someone to prove me. Moreover, I passed the exam with my own hard work. Besides, Yi Jifan hasn't reached a place of great power yet. What do I have to be afraid of? When she spoke, her voice was like glittering jewels and jade, clear and melodious. Her features were picturesque, like green mountains and clear waters. This was her spirit. Her gaze was clear, but the ripples in her eyes were like the waves of the sky. She had a lofty and oppressive aura, but it faded away with a smile. The only thing that could be seen was her attitude and her arrogance. This was her soul. Xia Jinyuan smiled. His elegant and handsome face was as gentle as water. He looked at her with his deep black eyes, which were full of amazement. So, this time, regardless of whether Yi Jifan did anything to you, you can still study in a famous school, right? There was a subtle sigh in his voice. Xia Jinyuan was sighing at himself for doing something unnecessary. He contacted the army and sent 2 captains, but they were captured by the career woman and became her bodyguards in exchange for special privileges for Little Fox's exam papers. A teacher, 2 captains, and a notary personally escorted her to the provincial government to mark her exam papers. Then, the Provincial Education Bureau hid Little Fox's scores. Unimportant people, even the city's education bureau, couldn't find out. He didn't want her to know about these things. He just wanted her to have a smoother life. Who knew, his little fox didn't need any of this at all. She could handle it herself. Yi Qian finished the last bite of the deep-fried dough stick and wiped the corners of her mouth with a tissue. She looked at the man who was eating elegantly and said meaningfully, As long as I can think of something, I can do it well. I don't need to rely on others. Captain Xia, I like to rely on my own hands and not others. You're right. It's better to rely on yourself than on others. This is why I admire you. Xia Jinyuan pretended not to hear the meaning behind her words. He picked up the car keys on the table and said, "We can leave after we finish eating. I have 3 days to rest. There's no need to rush to finish talking." He got up and left, leaving Yi Qian with a view of his tall and sexy back. He didn't give her a chance to continue the conversation. Yi Qian furrowed her brows and had no choice but to follow him. He was always like this. Even though she had made it so clear, he would still be able to pull out 1,000 caddies with just 4 tails of silver. Xia Jinyuan knew very well that he would not be able to spend the next 3 days with this cunning fox if he didn't brush it off lightly. During breakfast, he was amazed by every step Yi Qian took. Every step she took was so steady that it was like the foundation stone of a skyscraper, unshakable. What made him even more amazed was her temperament. She had cultivated both inside and outside to the point where her smile was elegant and her coldness was oppressive. Both her spirit and soul had been greatly tempered. Only 16 years old, she was only 16 years old. Growing up in such a difficult environment, her temperament should have been developed long ago. However, she didn't. After she walked out, it was as if she had washed away all the dirt on her body and was reborn on her own path. When they walked out of the breakfast shop, the sun was a little too bright. The ladies walking around had already opened their umbrellas. For a girl like Yi Qian who spent all her time in the military camp, an umbrella had never appeared in her bag. Xia Jinyuan wanted to remind her, but when he saw her straight legs under her hot pants, which were so fair that they reflected the sun's light, he realized that she didn't need an umbrella. Rolling in the desert, passing through the jungle, camping in the military camp. Her legs were as white and tender as tofu under the sun and wind. Chapter 370. It wasn't a long drive from the train station to the school. Yi Qian arrived at the school before 8 o'clock. Registration was supposed to start at 9 o'clock, but the school had already started at 8 o'clock. Yi Qian did not ask for Xia Jinyuan's help. She went through the admission procedures by herself. Then, she looked back at the words, Provincial No. 1 Middle School, that were shining under the sun. She did not expect that she would choose this school in the end. She chose the Provincial No. 1 Middle School that was 18 hours away from home. Xia Jinyuan watched as she walked towards him under the sun. Her short hair danced in the sun like a musical note. She walked calmly among the students coming and going. He could tell from the bright smile on her face that she liked the school as much as she liked the army. Put your luggage away first. Where are you assigned to your dorm? When she came closer, Xia Jinyuan, who had been waiting for her, smiled seductively and took out a school map. The boys' dorm is here, and the girls' dorm is near Swan Lake. Which one is yours? Yi Qian only had an admission form in his hand and nothing else. When she heard him, she said cheekily, the dorm hasn't been assigned yet. It'll be done in a few days. I have to look for Principal Chow first. Captain Xia, why don't you? What? Have you learned to kick me to the curb? Uncle Chen told me that I have to deliver you to him personally. Xia Jinyuan saw through her little scheme. She wanted to chase him away. His gaze darkened, and even his voice deepened. I, Xia Jinyuan, never break my promises. I'll keep my promises. Xia Jinyuan didn't smile, and his expression was cold. Yi Qian's heart skipped a beat. She looked away and pursed her lips. After a while, she said, Then I'll have to trouble you, Captain Xia. Sigh, if he didn't be serious with her and continued to smile with her, he would definitely be kicked out of school. He didn't use all his tricks when facing enemies, but when facing her, he really had to use all his tricks. However, it was indeed very interesting. The more she wanted to escape, the more he wanted to get closer. 16, 17, 18 years old. Even if he was 60, 70, 80 years old, he would still approach her tirelessly. He was so outstanding, and he could become a comrade who could fight side by side with him. It was difficult for him to give up. Principal Chow was having a small meeting with several school leaders and a teacher in his office. The main topic of the meeting was Yi Qian. Faced with Class 1's form teacher's question, Principal Chow smiled and said, "Oh, you, don't try to bargain with me after getting what you want. Didn't Teacher Zhu already tell you?" "What? You want to take advantage of me? You were the one who fought for Yi Qian. Back then, I didn't want to go overboard and hand her over to you. She's the famous Abbess Miju in the school. I'm afraid you'll drive her away." Teacher Miju, Teacher Tong, was a special grade teacher. She was also the treasurer of the province's #1 high school. Together with the math teacher, Teacher Zhu, they sent out 40 key undergraduates and 14 second-year undergraduates. There were 62 students in the class. Other than those who studied abroad, all of them were on the list. Teacher Tong didn't give the name Abbess Miju by her classmates, but she gave it to herself. It actually meant that she didn't make the list. In her class, there was no such thing as failing the list. Teacher Tong was in her early 50s. She was a cheerful teacher. She wasn't like the other form teachers who always put on a poker face. She always had a smile on her face, and she had the dignity of a teacher and the kindness of an elder. Chapter 371. Teacher Tong glanced at the newly appointed librarian, Old Chin, who was qualified to attend the meeting. She spoke slowly and with a smile, "Principal, do you already know what I'm going to say before I even mention it? Come on, tell me. Let me listen." Hearing this, Principal Chow pretended to be all ears. He laughed and said, "Let's see what Teacher Tong, who is the most popular student in our school, wants to fight for her student." Teacher Tong was the most popular student in the school. Sometimes, her students would even call her Sister Tong. This was enough to show how good Teacher Tong was in the eyes of her classmates. "If Yi Qian comes to our class, other than free tuition, can you give her priority in the competitions and activities? Every activity will give her a certain amount of scholarship. Rather than sponsoring her for free, I think it would be better to stimulate her motivation to study and let her know the benefits of studying can also improve her life." She was really thinking from the perspective of the students. Principal Chow nodded and agreed with her suggestion. At that time, there was only one reason why he did not consider arranging Yi Qian to be in her class, and this reason could not be told. As they were talking, there was a knock on the door, followed by a low and steady voice. "Is Principal Chow here?" "I'm Xia Jinyuan." Xia Jinyuan. Principal Chow, who was in the middle of a meeting, glanced at the newly appointed librarian and said, "Old Chin, you know this comrade Xia. Is he looking for you?" "I met with him yesterday and asked him to pick up Yi Qian this morning." Old Chin, who was also Principal Chin, was now an idle librarian in the provincial first high school. He stood up and smiled at Teacher Tong. "It should be Yi Qian. Teacher Tong, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. She's very brave and has no stage fright." In order to not fall behind Yi Qian's training, Principal Chin declined the position of director and became a librarian who had nothing to do after work, especially during the winter and summer vacations. The door opened and several school leaders filed out. When they saw Yi Qian, they smiled and left with the dignity of a leader. Come in, come in. Major Xia, come in and have a seat." Principal Chow politely shook hands with Xia Jinyuan. When he saw Yi Qian behind him, he couldn't stop smiling. Last year, he was still lamenting the fact that his school had lost a good student. In the end, this flower still fell into the hands of the provincial number 1 high school. Looking at Yi Qian, who had grown taller and had a calmer temperament, she said, "Classmate Yi Qian, I feel much more at ease now that you're here. Come in and have a seat. Your future homeroom teacher, Teacher Tong, is also here." And Principal Chow leaned sideways so that Yi Qian, who was looking straight ahead, could look up and look in the direction Principal Chow was pointing at. "Old Chen has been waiting for you for a long time. If you didn't come, I'm afraid he would have gone to the train station to pick you up himself." Principal Chen, who was wearing the school staff name tag, walked over and laughed as he looked at the dumbfounded girl. He said to Teacher Tong, "This child didn't know that I came to the provincial number 1 high school. I didn't tell her all this time. Now she's in shock." She couldn't be in shock, right? So the reason why Uncle Jen was so confident in leaving her alone was because Principal Chin was also at the provincial number 1 high school. Teacher Tong was familiar with Yi Qian. Last year, Yi Qian had left a deep impression on her during the provincial number 1 high school's intensive training. Otherwise, she wouldn't have fought so hard to get a student into her class. Chapter 372. Yi Qian, who had a photographic memory, recognized Teacher Tong. After a while, the two of them started chatting happily. On the other side, Principal Chin and Xia Jinyuan were already shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. On the other side, Teacher Tong was already asking about Yi Qian. She was a very kind teacher. At 50 years old, she had a pair of gentle but stern eyes. She asked about everything from Yi Qian's life to his studies to his personal problems. Teacher Tong also liked the quiet and strong student in front of her very much. She smiled the entire time and said, "All of us have looked at your test papers. Not only can you keep up with the class, you can even directly enter the 3rd year of high school. Class will officially start tomorrow. You will enter the classroom with me and give a simple self-introduction. I will also give you a list of your classmates in advance. You can look at it in advance. But don't worry, the arts and science classes have been separated. Our class is also a new class." She had once met an extremely unreliable form teacher who even wanted to destroy a student for his own selfish reasons. Then she looked at the teacher in front of her, who was always considerate of her students. They were both teachers, but the difference in their ethics was like heaven and earth. She pursed her lips and smiled. "Thank you for your concern. I don't have many difficulties in life, but if there is anything I don't understand in my studies, I will need your help." The more polite she was, the more the teacher liked her. Good, good, good. You are indeed a good student. Then come to the office later and get the list of your classmates from me." Teacher Tong gently patted the back of Yi Qian's hand. She stood up and said to Principal Chow, "Principal Chow, I still have some matters to attend to, so I will take my leave first." Yi Qian had met such a virtuous teacher in high school. He could already foresee that her high school life, which she had never experienced before, would definitely be colorful. After Teacher Tong left, Principal Chow walked out from behind his desk and sat down in the meeting room. He looked at Yi Qian with a slightly serious expression. "There is something I need to tell you in advance. You have to be mentally prepared before you go to the classroom tomorrow." For some reason, Yi Qian instinctively looked at Xia Jinyuan. It was as if looking at him would make him feel more at ease. Coincidentally, Xia Jinyuan, who didn't know what was going on, also looked over. Their eyes met across Principal Chin for a moment, and Yi Qian hurriedly looked away when Xia Jinyuan gave him a playful smile. Why was she looking at him out of nowhere? Yi Qian, who had been caught red-handed, felt a little annoyed. He collected himself and asked calmly, "Please speak. I'm listening." Yi Ying is also in the provincial first high school. You know that, right? Principal Chow didn't lay out any foreplay. Instead, he went straight to the point. My original intention was to put you in Class 6. It's a class where the learning atmosphere isn't too tense, and the class teacher in charge of Class 2 isn't too bad either. But after Teacher Tong saw the name of the class, she defeated the heroes and won you over to her class. Because of this, the class teacher in charge of Class 6 still has some opinions about Teacher Tong. The reason why he used the phrase, defeated the heroes, was because Teacher Tong had already argued with the school leaders. She also tried to convince the class teacher to let Yi Qian go to Class 1. For some reason, the class teacher in charge of Class 6 actually agreed to let Yi Qian go to Class 1. By the time she realized what had happened, it was already a foregone conclusion. Teacher Tong has taught 12 graduating classes. She has 24 years of experience as a class teacher. With her as your class teacher, I can rest assured. The only thing I am worried about is that you will be in the same class as Yi Ying. Chapter 373. That was the reason why Principal Chow couldn't say that he wanted to transfer Yi Qian to the 6th class. Yi Qian, who thought it was a big deal, laughed and said, "It doesn't matter if we're in the same class or not in the same school. So what if we're in the same class? It's not a big deal. I think it's not that I don't want to see her. She should be the one who doesn't want to see me." Xia Jinyuan laughed as well. It was indeed not a big deal, but his handsome face tensed up slightly, and a cold light flashed in the depths of his eyes. He had to be careful. It seemed that he had to trouble his strong female cousin. Looking at the time, it was already 10 in the morning. Remembering that he had something to do at noon, Xia Jinyuan smiled and said, "Uncle Chin, I've successfully completed my task, but I still have something to take care of, so I won't be able to accompany you for lunch. Goodbye." As he spoke, he stood up. His tall and slender body made the 3 people sitting in front of him look down at him. When Yi Jian saw his handsome chin, the memory of him asking her to wipe the sweat on her neck flashed through her mind. Her expression was a little unnatural. When his gaze landed on her, Yi Qian, who had finally relaxed, suddenly tensed up. She quickly stood up and said, "Then I'll see Captain Xia out. Uncle Chin, Principal Chow, I'll go look for Teacher Tong later. I'll also go back to the dormitory to pack my luggage." Xia Jinyuan was a little surprised that she took the initiative to see him out. Then, she pushed him out of the office. When he heard her slam the door shut like a thief, Xia Jinyuan couldn't help but laugh. He seemed to understand why she took the initiative. "Why do I feel like something bad is going to happen when I hear you laugh?" Yi Jian's ears were a little red. Just now, she was afraid that he would say something like, "See you tonight, little fox," again. In a moment of desperation, she didn't care too much. She pushed his back with both hands and impolitely left the office. At this moment, Yi Jian's hands, which were still warm from his body temperature, were placed behind her back. Her fingers moved unnaturally. Yi Jian knew that her face was burning to the point that even her ears were red. Unnaturally, she stubbornly met his gaze. Her pupils clearly reflected his exquisitely sculpted handsome face. Perhaps the school was a place that was filled with innocence and made it easy for people to calm down. Yi Jian suddenly realized that the eyes of the man whom she had not seen for more than a year were darker than before. They were as dark as a bottomless abyss. She looked at the pair of eyes that were as vast as the sea. They could hold the world and everything in it. Time had been kind to him. It did not leave any traces on his jade-like handsome face, but it had imperceptibly increased his aura. Back then, he had a piercingly cold aura that made all living things in the forest crawl. Now, there was a layer of profoundness on top of that. When he raised his eyes, the light that burst out from his eyes was unstoppable, with a might that made people unable to disobey. He was a soldier who had cultivated the prestige of the nation and made people tremble in fear. Is this a gift? Or not? Why, are you still thinking about whether you want to go back on your word? She just stared at him with her beautiful brows furrowed. Xia Jinyuan couldn't help but smile. He raised his hand and stroked her brows with his warm fingertips. Why do you frown so much at such a young age? Be careful that you don't get wrinkles between your brows before you get old. He was so quick that Yi Qian only had time to tilt her head slightly. Because she was too engrossed in looking at him, his fingers stroked her brows. Chapter 374. His warm fingers miraculously smoothed her furrowed brows. She tilted her head, took a step to the side, and escaped from his gentle touch. Yi Qian, whose mouth was a little dry, said calmly, Captain Xia, don't you have other things to do? Let's go. I have to go to Teacher Tong's office later. Like a frightened deer, she only wanted to leave the hunting area as soon as possible. Xia Jinyuan, who saw her unnatural behavior and escape, smiled faintly and walked down the stairs leisurely. The car did not stop at the campus. Instead, it stopped at the entrance of the campus. After they got downstairs, Xia Jinyuan said lazily, I left a gift for you in the car and forgot to take it. Little girl, you have to accompany me to the school gate. He easily blocked Yi Qian's excuse of only walking him downstairs, so she had no choice but to follow him obediently. Xia Jinyuan could be said to be self-taught, and it came to creating more time for each other. It was already past 10 o'clock, and the sun was already quite bright. Groups of students came and went in the school. Parents carried boxes, mats, buckets, and boxes, and the whole school was bustling with activity. No matter how hot the weather was, it could not take away the smiles on everyone's faces. The scenery at the school was very beautiful. After all, it was a famous school with 100 years of history, so the scenery was incomparable to that of ordinary schools. When Yi Qian saw Xia Jinyuan stop by a broken wall, her heart tightened. She pretended not to see him and continued to walk forward. Xia Jinyuan looked at her hurried back and laughed. How much did this sly little fox not want to spend another minute with him? What should she do? She didn't want to, but she couldn't stop him from wanting to. One walked in a hurry, while the other walked unhurriedly, taking advantage of his long legs. Fortunately, it was the registration day, so the students and parents who came and went were only concerned with their own things and did not pay much attention to them. Otherwise, one was handsome, and the other was beautiful. Who knew how much attention they would receive? Later, I'll go see Teacher Tong with Dad and ask her out for a meal tonight. You'll be assigned to Key Class 1. You must have a good relationship with the class teacher. A familiar voice with a completely different tone drifted out from the crowd. Yi Qian, who had been hurrying along, stopped in his tracks. He stood under the shade of a tree and swept his cold gaze over. She saw Yi Zhifan carrying his luggage and walking past her with Ying in tow. Behind them, Sun Dongqing was talking to a few of her classmates' mothers. She couldn't help but feel proud of herself. As for Ying, he had not seen her for more than a year, and she had grown a lot taller. Her long hair was draped over her shoulders, and she was wearing a light blue denim dress. In terms of appearance, her temperament was much better than that of her classmates. Another thing was that she was much fairer than she was in her previous life. It was true that whiteness could cover up all ugliness. She looked much prettier than before. He was in the same class. Very good, he was back to his junior high school life. Fortunately, he didn't meet Teacher Ku. Yi Qian smiled coldly and looked away. At the same time, Xia Jinyuan walked up and said, "At least you have the conscience to wait for me." It seemed to be another beautiful misunderstanding. His tall figure happened to block Sun Dongqing's unintentional gaze. "Yi Ying's mother, what are you looking at? Your Ying is waiting for you in front." One of the parents greeted her warmly and said with a hint of flattery, "I didn't expect my daughter to be in the same class as Ying again. Ying, please guide her in the future, especially." Chapter 375. Amidst the compliments, Sun Dongqing retracted her gaze and smiled. "It's my duty, it's my duty." Could it be that her eyes were playing tricks on her? Why did it seem like she just saw Yi Qian, that wretched girl? She must be seeing things. How could that wretched girl appear in a century-old school? Bah! With how she disdained even dogs, it would be strange if the provincial high school recruited her. After walking a few steps away, Xia Jinyuan, who was blocking her line of sight, discreetly turned back to look at the plump woman. His eyes narrowed dangerously. They bumped into each other on the first day of school. It seemed that little Fox would have to continue to battle of wits and courage with this family in high school. Fortunately, little Fox was not one to be taken advantage of. Subduing Ying in school was a small matter. The car was scorched by the sun. When the car door opened, a wave of heat hit them in the face. Yi Qian was forced to take a few steps back from the heat. She quickly grabbed Xia Jinyuan, who was bending over to get into the car. "Wait a minute, it's too hot." Her grab was a little too forceful. Xia Jinyuan was focused on his upper body, so he did not expect her to use so much force. With her forceful pull, his entire body actually fell into Yi Qian's arms. Xia Jinyuan, who rarely watched romance dramas, knew that this kind of action was usually done by the man, and the woman should be the one to fall. It was definitely not like his role had been reversed. The situation before him had developed into something he did not want to see the most. Fortunately, he had good waist strength. With Yi Qian's timely reaction, he used the force of her arm to stand up. With lightning speed, he successfully hugged Yi Qian as his support and forcefully turned the situation around. Yi Qian could only be dumbfounded. She really did not know that in a moment of desperation, she had pulled a major so hard that he almost fell into her arms. Afraid that he would embarrass himself, she hurriedly raised her hand and blocked with her arm. Meeting Xia Jinyuan, this nemesis, Yi Qian sometimes felt anxious about her own intelligence. What was she trying to block with her arm? Wasn't he waiting for her to take the initiative to hug him? The moment Yi Qian stretched out his arm, he regretted it. Just as he was feeling a little regretful, what happened next made him even more regretful. Xia Jinyuan was so skillful that he managed to turn what was supposed to be an embarrassing situation into a situation where he hugged her tightly and pressed his entire body against hers. She was trying her best to straighten her body to prevent both of them from falling, while he was trying his best to hug himself tightly to prevent both of them from falling. From an unexpected beginning to an unexpected end. Although the process was dangerous, there was an unexpected and pleasant ending. Xia Jinyuan did not let go immediately. He was a man, a mature man. It was normal for him to be reluctant to let go of the little fox in his arms. That was close. "I almost made a fool of myself today." Xia Jinyuan whispered into her ear in a frightened tone, "Little girl, you're quite strong. I was just getting into the car to get something. You didn't have to use so much strength as if you were trying to save me. Actually, if it was any other time, it would not have been possible." The main reason was that he was not on guard at the time. I didn't do it on purpose. I just used a little more strength than usual." Yi Qian was also quite frightened. Being held in his arms, he did not know what to do. His arms were wide open and completely, he did not dare to place them on any part of his body. Chapter 376. She blushed and panicked. All she could do was apologize. "I'm sorry, I'll be more careful next time." Captain Xia, if you stand firm, it'll be troublesome. Let go of my hand, it's a little hot, and there are so many people watching. It's quite embarrassing." Hugging was embarrassing in Yi Qian's eyes, but Xia Jinyuan felt as if an arrow had pierced his heart. How could it be embarrassing? It wasn't hot either. Her body was very cold, and there was not a trace of sweat on it. The fragrance that he had smelled in the morning was still there, and it was so cool that it seemed to have washed away the heat. Also, the benefits of growing taller came. In the past, he had to bend down to hug her, but now, he only needed to slightly tighten his chest and use a comfortable posture to hug her completely in his arms. They met when she was 14 years old. 2 years had passed, and at 16 years old, she had already grown into a slender and elegant girl who would make any boy infatuated with her. "Captain Xia, hurry and stand up." Yi Qian, who was feeling hot all over, couldn't help but poke his firm back with a finger. His muscles were lean and tight, and even if he poked with a finger, he could feel the hidden strength in his body. Xia Jinyuan lowered his head and took a deep breath next to her neck. Then, he stood up as usual and looked at the embarrassed Yi Qian with a half-smile. He sighed and said, "I almost fell down. Little fox, you're deliberately trying to embarrass me, aren't you?" "No, no." Yi Qian quickly shook his head and explained seriously, "I didn't mean anything else. I just felt that it was too hot in the car and you would feel uncomfortable in it, so I didn't think too much about it and pulled you up. The only thing I miscalculated was my strength. Also, I didn't expect Captain Xia to not be on guard at all." After explaining, his face turned even redder. Xia Jinyuan didn't want to leave anymore. His clear voice deepened, and it was as intoxicating as red wine. "You were so worried about me. Huh?" His voice dragged out, and it was like a lingering drunken kiss, filled with a sexy aftertaste. "It's not that I'm worried, but I think it can wait." Fortunately, Yi Qian's state of mind was stable. Faced with Xia Jinyuan's teasing, he immediately responded, "Captain Xia, please don't think too much. She was cute when she was alert, cute when she was shy, and cute when she was angry. In short, the more he looked at her, the more he loved her. The more he loved her, the more he looked." Instead of getting any closer, Xia Jinyuan raised his hand and rubbed her head with a smile. He pointed at the car and asked, "Comrade Yi Qian, may I ask if I can get into the car to pick up my present for you?" She was his comrade in arms, and their statuses were equal. If she remembered him, she would recognize him as her comrade in arms. The word comrade sounded better than any other beautiful words. Yi Qian's eyes curved like crescent moons. "Comrade, please get in the car. Make sure there's no problem." Her serious answer made Xia Jinyuan laugh again. This was a dangerous yet elegant man. He was also a strategist. He was a man who exuded nobility from head to toe. He wouldn't be too far away from you, but he would always be a step away from you that you couldn't get close to. His etiquette was impeccable, but you knew very well that this wasn't because he was close to you, but because of his upbringing. When he smiled, he was very gentle and stunning, but the luxurious aura he exuded didn't change at all. This was a man of a certain status. Seeing him smile, Yi Qian couldn't help but smile. His smile made her feel very comfortable. It was warm, without a trace of aggression. It was very sincere and warm. Chapter 377. The gifts he gave were still books, 3 thick books. Yi Qian took them and laughed. Poor books. They're almost burning from the roasting. Thank you, Captain Xiao, I like them very much. There was no gift more precious than books, not to mention the military books that she liked. It's good that you like them. Read them carefully. I'll mail you some professional military books on time. As for the books in the library, you can take a look at the famous generals. Xia Jinyuan had already started the car and turned on the air conditioner so that the heat inside would dissipate faster. Looking at the biography, I recommend the famous World War II General Montgomery. He liked to bet with the soldiers and soldiers in the army. He won the right to command a U.S. bomber including all the crew members. The Battle of El Alamein reversed the situation in North Africa. He was known as the Rat of the Desert. He was also a general who would cry for his soldiers. He shed tears for the young soldiers who had fought bloody battles and sacrificed their lives for the country. Also, little fox, you are very similar to him. General Montgomery did not enjoy motherly love since he was a child, but that did not stop him from becoming a famous general. Yi Qian was fascinated as he listened. He remembered it and nodded. Okay, I'll definitely go to the library to look for books about this general. If you can't find them, I can send them to you next time. The heat in the car had completely dissipated. Xia Jinyuan saw that more than 10 minutes had passed. He had to leave no matter how reluctant he was. Go back to school, I'm leaving. He was a straightforward person. He bent slightly and stepped into the car. He put down the car window and told Yi Qian, I have 3 days off. Little fox, you can make the arrangements tonight. Goodbye. He put down the handbrake, stepped on the gas, and drove away without waiting for Yi Qian's reply. He did not tell Yi Qian why he had to read books about General Montgomery. It was because this was a general who married late. He only met his beloved wife at the age of 38 and married at the age of 40. He said, as a soldier, I am loyal to my country. As a man, I will not betray my love. This sentence moved Churchill, and he saluted the general. All this required Yi Qian to read and understand in detail why he recommended this book. The car left, leaving behind the smell of gasoline. With his sensitive nose, Yi Qian waved his hand and smiled as he watched the car disappear from his sight. Only then did he turn around and walk back to school. I'm sorry, but are you a student of the province's #1 middle school? A courteous voice came from behind. Yi Qian turned around and looked at the man in front of him. His facial features were exceptionally refined, and even his eyes conveyed that he was a scholar. Yi Qian narrowed his eyes slightly and quickly filtered through the memories stored in his brain. He immediately recognized that this was the man he had seen through the glass wall at the breakfast shop in the morning. At that time, she was still thinking that this man was like a poem. No matter where he stood, he was like a painting. I am. Is there anything I can help you with? Yi Qian replied with a smile. I'll try my best to help you. The corners of the man's mouth immediately curled up, and he let out a long sigh of relief. I'm very sorry, but I need you to lead the way. I want to go to Principal Chow's place. But my sense of direction is very bad. I clearly walked through the school gates, but after walking around once, I ended up walking out of the school grounds. Yi Qian wanted to laugh, but it would be rude to laugh in front of this man. You want to see Principal Chow, right? I can take you there. But I'll have to trouble you to register with the security guards and then make a phone call. Chapter 378. He was looking for the principal, not a teacher, so he had to go through the formalities. No need, no need. I can contact him now. When the man heard this, he immediately took out his cell phone and dialed a number. After a while, he smiled and said, Uncle, I'm at the entrance of your school. Can one of your students please take me there? Yes, I met a girl at the entrance. The girl is quite vigilant. She needs me to register at the school security office and give you a call to confirm. Why don't you let her know? Uncle. Principal Chow actually had such a big nephew. After Yi Qian confirmed it, he led this man who had an unusually bad sense of direction into the office building. From his appearance and temperament, he didn't look like someone who would get lost easily. When Principal Chow heard that it was her, he immediately said, "Student Yi Qian, you must, seriously, lead my nephew to the office building like he's a pet dog, and send him to my office. He has no sense of direction. He's so bad that he can get lost at a crossroad. He can't remember more than 200 meters away. But you can't underestimate him. He's a genius who can speak 8 languages. He's the darling of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's much more precious than a pet dog. Please don't lose him." After holding it in for a long time, Yi Qian finally couldn't hold back his laughter when Principal Chow said, "Like he's a pet dog." Luckily, it was just a laugh, and he managed to hold back his laughter with the qualities of a soldier. He took another look at the man who always walked faster than him. He had a strong aura, and he was always one step faster than others. This was a man who was used to walking in front of others. He was also a man who wasn't used to waiting for others. His elegance was only on the surface, but he was also a strong and restrained man. This kind of man was actually born with no sense of direction. He could speak 8 languages, the darling of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. "Wrong, we should have turned right." "Sir, you turned left." The man who was walking in an imposing manner suddenly took a step forward and walked in another direction. Yi Qian quickly ran to catch up with him. "This way, we'll reach the bishop's building. That's where the office building is." The man's movements were very natural. It was obvious that he often did this kind of thing. He turned around and smiled apologetically, sorry for the trouble. He was very gentlemanly. His apology was as smooth as flowing water, poetic and beautiful. "No need, it's my job." Yi Qian couldn't accept the frequent apologies, and signaled for him to turn right. He took the initiative to follow behind. Seeing that they were about to reach the office building, the man's expensive mobile phone rang. Even the way he held the phone seemed to have undergone strict training. He took it out calmly and elegantly, and used the standard Mandarin of a television anchor to greet, "Hello." The change in expression and tone only took a second. The gentle-looking man just now still had a smile on his face, and even his tone didn't change. He said with a smile that was as gentle as the wind, in other words, "Now you need me to come forward and pay for your mistakes." Saying that you haven't interacted with him before is an excuse for you to make mistakes, right? Or do you think that these mistakes can be made up for and that it doesn't matter? His smile and tone didn't change, but his aura changed imperceptibly. It was deep, cold, and serious. It was as if he was a huge wave under an iceberg, and no one knew when it would break out of the ice. Chapter 379. Yi Qian didn't care about these things. What she cared about was, you can talk, but you don't have to turn left as you talk. Yi Qian had no choice but to block the man's way and use her actions to remind him, "You're going the wrong way." A man at work was very serious, and a man who was angry was not to be trifled with. However, a man who was in the middle of a scolding suddenly appeared in front of him and blocked his way. He raised his eyes and glared at Yi Qian with a stern look. The smile on his handsome face was still shallow, but it was no longer poetic and elegant. There was only thunderous hostility. Yi Qian didn't move. She promised Principal Chow that she would be responsible for sending this person to the office. She had to keep her promise. This was her integrity. The man frowned and didn't turn around. Instead, he walked past Yi Qian and continued to turn left, walking in the opposite direction of the office building. Looking at his back, Yi Qian suddenly understood how Captain Xia felt when she chased him away. Fortunately, he was well-educated and didn't turn hostile. Take a look at yourself. It's just that you're a little lacking in temperament. Seeing this person in front of you makes you want to fall out with him. It was almost 11 o'clock. Thinking that she still had to look for Teacher Tong, Yi Qian sighed and had no choice but to catch up with him. Once again, she stood in front of the man. You can only bear the consequences of your own mistakes. No one can pay for your mistakes. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is a matter of the country. From the moment you stand beside the leader, you are shouldering the honor and dignity of the country. It was this sentence that instantly extinguished the fire in Yi Qian's heart. She didn't disturb him anymore. Under the man's sharp gaze, she made way for him and allowed him to turn left as he spoke. After turning a few meters away, the man's Mandarin changed into a foreign language that she had never heard before. It was fluent and firm, but he maintained his politeness. It seemed like he was communicating, but he definitely maintained his dignity. This was a serious and unhurried communication for the sake of his country's dignity. Time passed bit by bit. Although the man was at the end of his road, he was definitely a person who could find beautiful scenery and make himself comfortable. 10 minutes later, he turned to the side of Swan Lake and sat on a long stone bench by the lake. He still used the same polite and dignified way of communicating in a great country. Yi Qian did not sit next to him. Instead, he stood quietly behind him, waiting to save him in time if he did not look where he was going and walked directly into Swan Lake. Fortunately, nothing like that happened until the end of the call. After the man hung up the phone, he did not stand up immediately. Instead, he sat there, exuding a cold and unapproachable aura. He sat there quietly for 5 minutes. Yi Qian saw him raise his head and take a deep breath, seemingly exhausted. He rubbed his face and stood up. After reprimanding the translator from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and communicating with the German engineer, Qin Xiu finally realized where he was after he calmed down. Then, he was completely confused and didn't know where he was going. Also, the girl from the provincial first high school who was following behind him just now, the girl he saw in the morning, the girl who stunned him for a long time, was also gone. Hello, are you done with your work? If you're done, I'll take you to see Principal Chow now. Yi Qian spoke calmly from behind him without a trace of impatience. 37 minutes have passed. I'm sure Principal Chow has been waiting for a long time. Chapter 380. The phone call lasted for a total of 37 minutes. It was not far from 12 o'clock. Qin Xiu turned around with a smile on his handsome face. He apologized naturally and politely, sorry for making you wait for so long. And just now, my attitude wasn't very good. I'm sorry. It's okay. Yi Qian just wanted to send this Buddha away. Even sending a 3-year-old home wasn't this tiring. She wasn't angry at all, which meant that she really didn't care. Qin Xiu pursed his lips and walked over. He sighed in his heart. Sigh, this is the first time we met. My impression of you is too bad. I have to fix it. As a staff member of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Qin Xiu was very good at diplomacy. He quickly found a way to fix it. We met this morning. Do you remember me? He reached out his hand. His fingers were long and slender, and his fingers were clean and beautiful. I'm Qin Xiu. I'm sorry to have taken up so much of your time. Yi Qian, who didn't like physical contact, only hesitated for a minute and a half before finally reaching out her hand. He was Principal Chow's nephew. Qin Xiu could tell from her half a second of hesitation that the student in front of him didn't like physical contact. He immediately released her hand within 3 seconds and maintained his smile. I don't know my way around. My sense of direction is always left or right. It's like my brain is separated from my body. I always make the wrong choice. It took courage to openly admit one's mistakes to a stranger. Yi Qian pursed his lips and smiled. He said calmly, no one is perfect, but Mr. Qin's sense of direction. It's true that you should have someone by your side at all times. Implicitly keeping unspoken words also represented a person's self-restraint. Qin Xiu's smile deepened. Just as he was about to speak, the phone in his hand vibrated. He first said, sorry. Then he looked down at his phone. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly again. He said to Yi Qian, it took us almost 40 minutes to get to the office from the school gate. My uncle probably thinks I've gone missing. His clean fingers pressed the answer button. He said in a cool and elegant voice, I'm at the school's Swan Lake. Her. Still here. Okay, I'll be right there. I'm begging you, please don't work while walking. Yi Qian still has things to do, so I can't let her follow you around the school. Principal Chow felt that his hair had turned a lot whiter in the past half an hour. It turned out that her name was Yi Qian. It was a very simple name that could be easily memorized after being recited once. Around noon, Qin Xiu did not receive any more calls, and Yi Qian finally sent him to his office without a hitch. Principal Chow was already waiting for him at the door. When he saw him, he quickly walked up to him and said, why didn't you bring your entourage? If you go missing in such a big provincial capital, how am I going to explain it to your mother? When Yi Qian noticed that something was wrong with his expression, he had already left quietly. A person who was being scolded would not want someone else to watch while they were being scolded, so he knew better than to leave. I took a work call and lost track of time. Qin Xiu did not take it to heart. Because he was not good with directions, he had countless entourages since he was young. In the past, he had no choice, but now, he did not like it. He changed the topic without leaving a trace. I still have to thank. He turned around to thank Yi Qian, but he realized that the girl who was supposed to be behind him had already left. Chapter 381. She left a long time ago. You're lucky to have met her. She's a very responsible girl. She accompanied you for more than 40 minutes at noon. Principal Chow saw that he was still wearing a bow tie and knew that he had rushed over after finishing his work. Go sit down and relax. I'll arrange a car so we can go out for lunch. What's your schedule in the afternoon? If not, you can go back to the hotel to rest or go out to play. But you have to bring your entourage. Qin Xiu looked away and smiled at his uncle's nagging. Okay, I'll be careful. I want to walk around your school in the afternoon. It's fine if I don't go out. This century-old school has beautiful scenery. If I'm tired, I can sit down and relax. As long as I don't walk out of the school, you don't have to worry. Other than his poor sense of direction, Principal Chow was not worried about anything else. Okay, school just started and I have a lot of things to do. You can walk around the school. When are you flying back to Beijing? The day after tomorrow. I'm not going back to Beijing. I'm going to Germany with the delegation. As a staff member of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Qin Xiu was rarely in China. He was either abroad or on the plane. Yi Qian pushed open the door and entered the teacher's office. Compared to the 30 degrees outside, the coolness inside swept away the heat. Come, sit here. This is Teacher Zhu's desk in our class. Teacher Tong waved her hand and gestured for Yi Qian to sit at the desk next to her. She pointed at the file on the desk and looked at the time. She smiled kindly. The roster is here. Take a look at it yourself. I'm not done with my work yet. I'll go to the cafeteria at 12:30. Okay. Yi Qian smiled and nodded. Okay, you don't have to worry about me. The teachers were very busy on the first day of school. Teacher Tong was the only one in the big office who had not gotten off work for lunch. Yi Qian gently took the roster out of the file and opened it to look at it carefully. The first few lists were of the top students. When he flipped to the 15th page, Yi Ying's photo came into view. Not bad. Not only did her skin become fairer, but her handwriting also improved. He looked at her strengths. Dancing, English. Yi Qian raised his eyebrows and smiled playfully. It seemed that she had been working hard on English for the past year or so. She wasn't surprised. In her previous life, when Yi Ying came back from studying abroad, she spoke fluent English in front of her. She didn't know if she would do that in high school. After all, in her previous life, she had only studied in junior high and never sat in class again. Sitting beside Teacher Zhu's desk, Yi Qian flipped through the list page by page. After scanning through the names and photos, he finished flipping through all 60 names within 10 minutes and memorized them. The provincial first high school was indeed a century-old school, and Class 1 was the best of the best. However, there were also some students with poor grades. Resources needed to be allocated reasonably, and the school couldn't put all the good students in the second class into one class. It could only be said that the average score of the first class was higher than the other classes. When Teacher Tong was done with her work, she looked up and saw Yi Qian flipping through a high school math textbook. She glanced at the roster that was still in its original place and smiled at the girl who was engrossed in her book. Why are you reading a textbook? Take a look at the roster. There are photos in it. You can also get to know your classmates. She thought that Yi Qian wasn't flipping through the book. I've finished looking through the roster. I didn't want to disturb you because you were busy, so I picked up Teacher Zhu's textbook to take a look. Yi Qian closed the math textbook that the teacher had prepared for class. She didn't tell the teacher about her relationship with Yi Ying. Chapter 382. When she was working, Teacher Tong wore a pair of plain glasses tied with a black string. She took off her glasses and looked at Yi Qian with a slight smile. It seems like you intentionally hid your true strength during last year's intensive training. Yi Qian, you know how to hide your true strength. That's really rare. To be able to remember the names and faces of 60 students, including herself, was not something an ordinary person could do. At the very least, she had never encountered someone like that in all her years of teaching. Furthermore, she was also curious as to how a girl who had just turned 16 in May could maintain a calm heart that was calmer than an adult's, restrain her sharpness, and walk down the path step by step in a solid manner. Yi Qian rarely talked about her family matters. Faced with Teacher Tong's inquiry, she thought for a moment before taking out her own registration form. She pointed to her parents' column and said with a slightly restrained voice, "I'm different from the other students here. I have to know how to protect myself." Sometimes, hiding one's true strength doesn't mean that one is weak. Hiding one's true strength is also a form of self-protection. Furthermore, as long as I can maintain a certain level, not be too abrupt, and not drop the ball at critical moments, I should be able to get along better with my classmates in class. This was Yi Qian's way of survival in both lifetimes. It was also the way to get along with others. Especially with students. In an environment where there was competition, hidden strength, and even small groups, it was a good thing to hide one's true strength. Her words left Teacher Tong speechless for a long time. After a while, she sighed. Yi Qian, I just want to say that I have no regrets in my teaching career for the past few decades to have a student like you before I retire. However, child, you have to remember that the fittest survive. This is one of the mottos of century-old famous schools. Here, the competition begins the moment you step foot into this school. It's the same with academic results. Especially in Class 1, where results speak louder than words. Your good grades may attract jealousy, but you have to remember that there is another side to human nature, and that is admiration for the strong. Teacher Tong was a virtuous teacher. She did not want to see Yi Qian suppress her true strength to accommodate others. She should not hide her true strength at such a young age. Young people should live a carefree and unrestrained life, unrestrained and unrestrained. If they still had to be careful in school, they would have to be even more careful when they step out into society. Society is a big environment, and there's nothing wrong with being careful. However, school is different. This is a place for students to be happy, so there's no need to be careful. The bigger the stage, the more capable you are. Yi Qian, remember what Teacher Tong said today. The provincial first high school is a big stage for students to freely roam the sky. You don't have to hide your strength. It's your ability to study well. How can your classmates say such things? Moreover, even if there is, you don't have to take it to heart. The strong are like a halo. If there are people who worship you, there will be people who are jealous. The teacher and the student talked in the office for half an hour before they left. If Principal Chen and Uncle Jen taught Yi Qian how to be self-reliant, then Miss Tong taught Yi Qian how to be mellow, roundabout, and gentle. The combination of hardness and gentleness, Zhang Qi had a strong heart and a soft heart. In the days to come, when Yi Qian relied on his own strength to reach the peak of military power step by step, Teacher Tong was one of the people he thanked the most in interviews. Chapter 383. After lunch, Teacher Tong went back to her office while Yi Qian went to look for Principal Chen to get his luggage. Principal Chen was busy with his work. Other than when school started, he had nothing else to do. He liked working in the library. Also, he was in poor health. In order to live a few more years and see how far the girl he personally groomed could go, Principal Chen had started to take care of his body. A new batch of books had arrived at the school. There were books on astronomy, geography, ancient and modern. A century-old school would always have more resources than other schools. This could be seen from the corner of the books. 2 hours later, Yi Jian, who felt like a scholar, took her luggage and walked to the dormitory. The campus at 4:00 was much quieter than it was in the morning. Walking along the stone path with tall camphor trees on both sides, Yi Qian walked to the left side of Swan Lake and arrived at the female dormitory. When he walked to Swan Lake, he saw someone sitting leisurely on a stone bench under a weeping willow. His long arms were lazily draped over the back of the bench as he admired the beautiful scenery of Swan Lake. Yi Qian thought for a moment and walked over. He was an old acquaintance. If she really walked around him this time, she didn't know how he would tease her the next time they met. "You didn't walk around me. Little fox, I'm surprised again." Xia Jinyuan looked like he had eyes on the back of his head. Before Yi Qian even got close, he turned his head to look at her. The golden sun in the west was variegated. As the willow swayed, it gently shone on his handsome face. It was half bright and half dark, making his expression look dark and unreadable. Seeing that Yi Qian was still carrying his luggage, he stood up and said, "I need you to go out and help me with something. It's serious. Do you want to put your luggage in my car? Or maybe put it back in the dormitory?" Although there was a faint smile on his face, there was a hint of coldness in his eyes. Yi Qian already believed that he was talking about serious business. It was indeed, serious business. If you're in a hurry, you can leave immediately. If you're not in a hurry, I can leave my luggage in the dormitory first. Yi Qian picked up his rather light luggage. There wasn't much inside, only a few sets of clothes. After waiting for about half an hour, Xia Jinyuan took the luggage that had passed through his hands several times today, but he still didn't put it back in the dormitory. He raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "Then take it with you. Maybe you can change it at night. There's a possibility that I won't be going back to school tonight. Let me know in advance." She wouldn't have any objections to sleeping outside, even if he suggested sleeping by the side of the road or under a bridge. When they got back into the car, Xia Jinyuan's phone started ringing. He glanced at Yi Qian before answering the call. "Come over in 20 minutes. Book a hotel in advance. If it's too late, sleep in the hotel." Yi Qian did not ask what was going on. She was used to others speaking first. The car was parked at the entrance of the traffic bureau. Before the car was parked, 2 police officers in dark green uniforms ran over. Their expressions were solemn. The suspect has strong anti-reconnaissance abilities. His methods are brutal. He erased all possible traces of the crime at the scene of the crime. Get all the Sky Eyes in the province, including the ones at the scene of the crime. We don't have much time. We need to find the suspect as soon as possible. As soon as they got out of the car, one of the police officers quickly told them everything they knew about the suspect. The other police officer led the way. The 4 of them hurriedly appeared in the monitoring room of the province's Sky Eyes system. First, get the Sky Eyes at the scene of the crime. Also, get the Sky Eyes at the 2 nearby crossroads. Xia Jinyuan's eyes darkened as he made the arrangements. Then, he said to Yi Qian, "You have a good memory and are highly recognizable. I've prepared a pen and paper for you. Just draw whatever you find on the paper." Chapter 384. Our job is to assist the investigation team. We just need to find clues. Since the successful career woman had asked for his help, he had to help her. Actually, it didn't matter if Yi Qian didn't come, but he couldn't resist his desire to see her. Yi Qian had already looked at him several times. Did a special forces soldier need to be involved in solving a case? I was asked to do this, so I couldn't refuse. Xia Jinyuan, who was deliberately 2 steps behind, quickly leaned forward and said to the little girl, who looked calm but was actually asking him with her eyes, "If I don't ask you to come with me, how can we be together tonight?" Yi Qian instantly realized that the seriousness in his eyes was all an act. He didn't know what he was going to do before he arrived at the traffic bureau. "Xia Jinyuan, can you be more serious? Look, you're thinking too much again. What do you think we're going to do tonight?" Xia Jinyuan's lips curled up slightly. He straightened his back and walked into the surveillance room that was pushed open by 2 policemen in an elegant and cold manner. "Follow me. We only have 5 hours. After 5 hours, we need to go to another place." He had stirred up her calm emotions, but in an instant, he put them down and started talking about serious matters. The speed of the change made Yi Qian's chest heave up and down a few times. He took a deep breath before walking in. There were quite a lot of Sky Eyes in the provincial capital. Under Xia Jinyuan's instructions, Yi Qian began to put aside his distractions and immerse himself in work. The heavy door of the control room that was not locked opened halfway. A tall man wearing a slim suit jacket and a pair of slim trousers of the same color stood at the door. His gaze fell lightly on the slender student's body. Was this the high school student that 6th brother had mentioned? "Secretary Xia, please tell Changsheng that our bureau will definitely solve the case within 3 days. A uniformed police officer stood beside the woman and said seriously, "We will not give the suspect a chance to escape from our province." The woman's makeup was exquisite, and she looked capable and experienced. Even though she was standing in front of the bureau chief, her aura was not suppressed at all. She nodded and smiled. "Okay, I will definitely tell Chongqing." Serial crimes, wanted nationwide, fled to the southern province's provincial capital, and committed a violent murder. If this case was not solved, Chong province would not be able to sleep peacefully. This case had even alarmed the capital. Sixth sister was here, and she had asked him to do things several times. Since she was here, she could forget about leaving quickly. No matter what, he had to help her solve this big problem. Wasn't finding clues his forte? The question was, why did he bring that high school student with him? The woman, whose emotions had already gone back and forth a few times, frowned without batting an eyelid. She did not disturb the two people who were working hard and assisting the bureau. She turned around and left quietly. 178 centimeters in height, 75 kilograms in weight, short hair. After nearly 4 hours, Yi Qian drew a man's head on a piece of paper. The 6 screens were all frozen. It was either the man's legs, the man's back, or an extremely blurry front. Xia Jinyuan leaned forward slightly and slowly explained the situation on his side to Yi Qian. He should be nearsighted. Occasionally, he would squint his eyes. He's not used to wearing glasses, but he would never leave his glasses. Hence, there was a trace of glasses on the pool of blood at the scene. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.